Welcome back, brothers, to Amalur. Tonight's video, we're diving into lore of the Emperor's Warbringers. Before getting into madness, be sure to like, comment any videos and topics you want to see in the future. Be sure to subscribe from that beer. I want to thank you guys for the support. Y'all been killing it. Now, let's get to the madness.
Vulscus Secundus burned beneath a sky the color of old blood. Its oceans were not water. They were promethium, black and shining, continent-wide reservoirs of holy fuel dragged up from the poisoned guts of the world and left to simmer beneath cathedral refineries large enough to swallow mountains. Storms walked across those oceans with the slow wrath of gods. Lightning struck the burning slicks and became walls of flame that reached into the low clouds, making the heavens glow orange for months at a time. The world had forgotten night. Darkness came only in the underhives, in the sealed labor vaults, in the corpse silos, and in the lungs of men who breathed soot until their spit turned black. From orbit, Vulscus Secundus looked like a wounded eye staring into the void. Its hive cities rose from the fire seas on foundations of adamantium and old sin. Each hive was a vertical empire of iron, bone, glass, rust, prayer banners, weapon towers, smokestacks, and execution balconies. Between them stretched trench continents where billions of Imperial subjects crawled through their assigned lives in regimented misery, bent beneath the holy burdens of production, obedience, hunger, and fear. Manufactoria roared without pause. Refineries screamed as pressure spirits strained inside furnace cathedrals. Corpse grinders worked in their sacred rhythm, taking the dead from the habstacks and rendering them into ration paste, tallow, fertilizer, and machine oil. The dead served, the living served. The unborn were counted as future servitors of the tithe. Above every gate, every ration hall, every furnace shrine, and every execution yard, the Aquila watched with two blind heads. The world claimed loyalty. Its planetary governor, Halbrecht Vornus, sent hymns to terror with every astropathic cycle. He signed each tithe ledger in his own blood, as tradition demanded. He sent regiments to the Astra Militarum, armor columns to distant crusades, Prometheum convoys to war fronts whose names the workers of Vulscus Secundus would never hear. He stood beneath the golden image of the master of mankind and spoke of duty, purity, and obedience, while billions knelt before pict screens and repeated his words through cracked lips. The ecclesiarchy preached loyalty as well. Its confessors walked the ash streets in red robes darkened by soot, swinging censers that spilled incense over gutters full of amputated limbs and factory runoff. Its preachers roared from pulpit tanks, their voices amplified across labor districts, where men died at their stations rather than lose a minute of production. Its choirs sang of the Emperor's light, while skeletal penitents dragged idols through streets paved with brass shell casings. The planetary defense forces still wore Imperial badges. Their colonels still saluted beneath the Aquila. Their banners still bore the names of saints and compliance martyrs. The noble houses still held feast days in honor of terror. The astropath still cried messages into the warp. The administratum still received its numbers. The tithe continued. All of it was a lie. Scout Domitian had watched the lie breathe for 37 days. He lay beneath a cloak of ash fiber and treated corpse skin in the shadow of a corpse hauler's gantry, motionless among the dead. The bodies around him had been dead for 2 days, most of them laborers from refinery district Gath, though 3 wore the grey coats of loyalist enforcers and 1 had the shaven skull and branded cheeks of a manufactorum scribe. Their throats had been opened with chain knives. Their stomachs had been slit to search for swallowed message cylinders. Their eyes were gone, taken by sump flies or by the children who scavenged wet things from the death carts. Domitian did not move when the flies crawled over his helm lenses. He did not move when corpse gas bloated the dead beside him until their bellies tightened like drums. He did not move when a hauler servitor misjudged its route and rolled over the arm of the dead scribe, crushing the bones into a soft crackle of splinters and meat. He had been bred and carved and remade to master stillness. He was not yet a full battle brother, not yet honored with the complete black carapace rights of an Adeptus Astartes warrior, but he was no longer human. His heart beat slowly, spaced with cold discipline. His breathing passed through filters thick with soot. His body heat bled into the ash cloak in carefully regulated pulses. He had buried himself among rot and industry and fear, and the world had failed to see him. Through a cracked slit in the gantry wall, he watched rebel officers pass beneath him. They did not call themselves rebels. No traitor ever did, not at first. They called themselves the True Dawn Synod, the faithful continuance, the keepers of the first oath. Their officers wore Imperial uniforms with minor changes that a frightened citizen would never notice. A copper thread sewn through the left cuff, a black sunburst etched on the inner face of a belt buckle, a half circle burned beneath the collarbone. Coded devotion, hidden in plain sight. Domitian recorded everything. His helm's autosenses tracked gait patterns, vocal signatures, retinal glints, weapon manufacture marks, scent traces, and heat silhouettes. His mind arranged them into hierarchies of guilt: rebel preacher, mutant overseer, PDF captain, noble courier, furnace guild executioner, heretic factor, false confessor, bloodline servant of House Vornus, unknown cult handler. The Warbringers did not strike because an enemy existed. They struck when the enemy had been understood. Weeks before a drop pod split the heavens, their scouts moved through the arteries of a world. They mapped Vox nodes and fuel arteries, bunker gates and orbital defense silos, ration vaults and corpse processing routes, noble bloodlines and priestly conspiracies. They marked bridges that would fall, doors that would open, officers who would die first, and districts whose sacrifice would choke the enemy advance. They learned the shape of treachery before they cut it from the flesh of the Imperium. A lesser warrior might have called it patience. Domitian knew better. It was judgment taking breath. His vox bead clicked once inside his helm. No sound followed. The signal was pressure, not speech. A pulse through encrypted bone induction, tight enough that no mortal receiver could have known it existed. Carius. Domitian blinked a rune alive. The scout sergeant's voice entered his skull as a dry whisper stripped of all waste. Report. Column entering the press yard. 3 PDF officers, 2 confessors, 1 guild factor, 46 armed labor brutes, mutant grade, tolerated under local production statute, 4 prisoners. Identify the prisoners. Domitian magnified the image. The prisoners were being dragged by hooks through the meat of their shoulders. One wore the pale green sash of a ration clerk. One had the iron neck ring of a sanctioned machine tender. One was barely more than a boy, shaven-headed, wrists broken and tied with wire. The fourth had no face left. His skin had been cut away from brow to chin, leaving red muscle shining beneath the gantry lumen strips. One is the informant, Domitian said. Which? The faceless one. A pause followed. Static whispered like dust moving over bone. Does he still live? Yes. Then he may still betray the network. Domitian knew the order before it came. He knew it with the same certainty that he knew the weight of his rifle and the taste of oil inside his helm. Observe, Carius said. The prisoners were hauled into the press yard. It had once been a Prometheum compression station, but the rebels had turned it into a place of punishment. A brass image of the Emperor stood above the central press, its face blackened by smoke. Someone had painted tears beneath its eyes. Someone else had scratched prayers into the metal floor, where countless bodies had been dragged screaming toward the gears. A confessor climbed onto a crate of shell casings and raised his hands. "Witness the mercy of truth," he cried. The labor brutes beat the prisoners with iron rods until they fell. The boy screamed first. The ration clerk tried to pray, but his jaw broke under the second blow, and his words became wet clicking. The machine tender fought with surprising strength, killing one brute by biting out his throat before a PDF officer shot him through both knees. The informer made no sound. Without a face, Domitian could not read his expression. Without lips, the man could not form words. His eyes rolled white in the red ruin of his head. Domitian's finger rested along the frame of his rifle. He could kill them all. The thought did not come from pity. Pity was for mortals who still believed suffering had weight on the scales of the galaxy. It came from calculation, from the instinct to remove enemy assets when they presented themselves. His rifle could punch through the confessor's skull and burst the traitor's brains across the false Aquila behind him. A second shot would open the guild factor's chest. A third would kill the PDF captain before the first corpse struck the ground. He could be gone into the ash before their blood cooled. He did not fire. The network mattered more than 4 prisoners. The war mattered more than the district. The Emperor did not require gestures. He required victory. The press began to move. Its gears were vast, black, and wet. They turned with slow industrial hunger, teeth the size of shields grinding together beneath pipes that dripped hot fuel residue. The boy went first. The brutes shoved him into the mechanism feet first, and his scream became so high that several mortal traitors laughed and covered their ears. His legs vanished to the knees with a crunch that shook the deck. Blood sprayed in a fan across the nearest brute. The gears took more of him, pelvis cracking, belly splitting under pressure, intestines looping out in purple ropes before being dragged down and flattened. His ribs burst one by one. His skull lasted longer than it should have, caught sideways between 2 iron teeth, until the pressure pulped it with a sound like a fruit crushed under a tank tread. Grey matter and teeth splattered the shrine floor. Domitian watched. He recorded faces. The ration clerk followed, then the machine tender, then the informer. The faceless man fought only at the end. Perhaps pain returned to him. Perhaps the sight of the press restored what torture had broken. He thrashed against the hooks and wire, exposed muscles sliding wetly over his jawbones. The brutes laughed as they lifted him. One called him a loyal dog. Another told him to bark for terror. The informer looked up. For a moment, Domitian thought the man saw him. Impossible by mortal senses. Yet the informer's white eyes fixed on the gantry shadow where the scout lay hidden among corpses. Recognition did not touch those eyes, nor accusation, only need. Bare, animal, sacred need. Domitian did nothing. The press took the informer head first. The skull collapsed immediately. Bone, brain, and torn facial muscle disappeared between black gears. His body spasmed, as if trying to flee after death had already claimed command of it. Blood pumped from the neck in thick bursts. The brutes shoved the twitching corpse deeper until shoulders cracked, spine folded, and the remains became another red slick feeding the refinery sump. Carius spoke again. "Name the killers." Domitian transmitted the marked identities. "Good," said Carius. "Their usefulness ends during the first descent." A silence followed, filled by machinery, chanting, and the soft patter of blood dripping from the press. Domitian said. The informant maintained silence. He fulfilled his function. He looked toward my position. Then he died with proof that the Emperor had not turned his face away. Domitian did not answer. Carius continued, his tone colder than the ash around them. Compassion is an expenditure. Spend it only when victory requires it. The lesson settled where doubt had tried to form. Domitian accepted it, as he accepted recoil, hunger, pain, and the weight of orders. The dead had served. The living would serve. The guilty had named themselves. Across the press yard, the confessor dipped his fingers in the informer's blood and drew a mark on the brass Aquila. Not over the eagles' heads, beneath them, a curve, a hook, a small crescent, quickly hidden by a smear of ash. Domitian magnified the mark and froze it in memory. Not an Imperial sign, not local guild script. Chthonian derivation, perhaps. Debased, ritualized, old. The trail led below. When the press yard emptied and the corpse haulers came, Domitian moved for the first time in 9 hours. He slid from the heap of bodies as though born from them, his ash cloak shedding flakes of dried blood. No mortal eye marked his passing. He descended through maintenance ribs, crawled beneath a conveyor slick with human fat, crossed a sump channel where blind things fed on chemical runoff, and entered the undershrine through a fracture behind a cracked statue of St. Drusus. Carius was already there. The scout sergeant stood in the dark without needing light. He wore camouflage over carapace plate, the colors of ash and rust breaking the outline of his transhuman frame. His helm was turned toward the shrine's inner chamber. Beside him crouched Zosimus, knife drawn, one hand resting on the throat of a dead sentry whose blood still steamed in the cold. No greeting passed between them. Words were tools. Tools were used when needed. The shrine was small by the standards of Vulscus Secundus, which meant it could hold 10,000 kneeling bodies beneath its vaulted roof. Pilgrim skulls lined the walls in polished rows, each one lacquered until it shone like old ivory. Generations had come here to kneel before the relic at the chamber's heart. Generations had whispered gratitude. Generations had dragged their children across broken glass to prove devotion before a weapon said to have been carried during the Great Crusade, a weapon said to have slain the first tyrant of the world and sanctified Vulscus Secundus beneath Imperial law. The relic rested inside a cage of gold. It was a bolt pistol, ancient and pitted, its casing black beneath layers of incense residue and votive oil. Purity seals hung from it in thick clusters. Chains looped around the plinth. Candles burned below it in a lake of melted wax mixed with old blood. The shrine smelled of metal, rot, and false holiness. Carius approached the cage. "Records name it as the Hand of Compliance," Zosimus whispered. "Records lie," said Carius. Domitian watched the sergeant remove a small vial of solvent from his belt. The liquid smoked when it touched the gold leaf coating the plinth. Sacred lacquer peeled away in curling strips. Beneath it was older metal, darker, scarred by age and deliberate concealment. The symbol emerged slowly, like a corpse rising through black water. An eye, a single watching eye set within a cruel, angular design. Domitian felt the silence change. Zosimus murmured an oath to the throne. Carius did not react. He stared at the revealed mark, as if he had expected it from the beginning, as if the world itself had only confirmed its sentence. "The Eye of Horus," Domitian said. The words tasted like poison inside his helm. Above them, the shrine bells began to toll, not from mortal hands, from the automatic rites of the hour. Pilgrims would soon descend. Priests would come with censers. The lie would dress itself in incense again if permitted. Carius turned from the relic and looked upward, past the vaulted ceiling, past the hive, past the burning skies, toward the unseen warship waiting in the black. His vox clicked open on a channel that had remained silent for 37 days. "The relic is false," he said. "Bring war." The battle barge Deathmonger did not announce itself to Vulscus Secundus. It hung in high orbit beyond the glare of the Prometheum storms, a mountain range of adamantium and gunmetal suspended in the cold, its hull painted in void-dark camouflage that broke its silhouette against the starless gulf. Its armor plates bore the scars of forgotten wars, each one sanctified with oil, ash, and the names of the dead. Its prow was shaped like an accusation. Its macro battery housings slept beneath armored shutters. Its launch bays were sealed like clenched jaws, holding within them the iron teeth of drop pods, gunships, boarding craft, and death. Below it, Vulscus Secundus burned. The planet turned slowly beneath sheets of flame. Prometheum seas raged with continent-wide firestorms, their light spilling upward through the atmosphere in a hellish glow. Hive spires rose from the burning oceans like rusted spearheads thrust from a corpse. Each hive was large enough to bury mountains in its foundations and crown them with cathedrals, gun towers, refinery stacks, orbital lifts, and noble palaces plated in tarnished gold. Around them crawled trench cities and manufacturing belts filled with billions of Imperial subjects, most of them born, worked, punished, and rendered down without ever seeing an unpoisoned sky. The world had sent its tithes, the world had sung its hymns, the world had lied. Aboard the Deathmonger, Captain Phasas watched the planet through the Strategium's oculus window and felt nothing that mortals would have recognized as anger. Rage was imprecise. Disgust was an indulgence. Hatred, though useful in battle, clouded judgment when allowed to rule the hand before the blade had found the proper joint. Rebellion was not an emotion to be answered. It was a structural flaw. A fortress did not hate the crack in its wall. A mason did not argue with rotten stone. One measured, one marked, one brought the hammer down with sufficient force to prevent the flaw from spreading. Phasas stood in full battle plate, his armor the drab olive of the Emperor's Warbringers, its surface darkened further by void ash and ritual oils. The crossed blades of his chapter marked one pauldron. The other bore the designation of the 5th Company, picked out in bone-white script around a small iron skull. His helm rested beneath one gauntleted hand upon the command lectern, its lenses black and empty. His face was severe, pale from void light and old surgery, the bones hard beneath scarred skin. A son of dawn did not require ornament to appear merciless. Stillness was enough. The strategium around him was cathedral and war machine in equal measure. Vaulted ribs of black iron rose into incense haze. Servo skulls drifted between brass cogitator banks, their parchment trails listing ammunition stockpiles, atmospheric entry tolerances, and martyrdom probabilities for each strike element. Hooded chapter thralls stood at their stations with data spikes buried in their skulls, whispering Binharic responses to the ship's machine spirit. The deck trembled with distant engine prayer. Somewhere far below, hundreds of drop pods waited in their launch cradles, each one an armored coffin, prepared to become a meteor. Chaplain Valak entered without ceremony. His crozier struck the deck once, with a sound like a judge's hammer falling on a condemned world. He wore black over the Warbringer's olive, his skull helm locked to his belt, and his bare face marked by lines of ash script. His eyes were deep-set and pitiless. Chains of oath parchment hung from his armor, each one sealed with black wax and stamped with the sigil of the ecclesiarchy, the chapter, or a campaign whose survivors had long since become names in stone. His presence changed the air. Mortal crew lowered their gazes. Even the servo skulls drifted wider around him, as though their simple machine spirits understood what he carried. "Carius has confirmed the mark," Valak said. Phasas did not turn from the burning world. "I heard. The relic is false. The relic is worse than false." Valak came to stand beside him at the oculus. For a time, both warriors watched the planet in silence. Beneath them, billions breathed treason without understanding its shape. Millions carried rifles beneath banners, still painted with the aquila. Priests mouthed prayers before hidden sigils. Governors signed loyal decrees with hands already given to older devotions. The poison had entered the stonework, the bloodlines, the liturgies, the pipes, the altars, and the ration ledgers. "What serves the God Emperor is just," Valak said. His voice was low, hard, and certain. "What harms his Imperium is false. What is false must be purged by flame and sword." Phasas looked at him then. "You will have both." The hololithic table awakened between them. Vulscus Secundus rose in ghostlight, a sphere of layered tactical projections rotating above the obsidian surface. Continents of promethium burned in translucent amber. Hive spires shone as black needles. Defense networks crawled across the display as red veins. Vox nodes flickered in white. Fuel arteries pulsed in gold. Orbital defense platforms circled like iron carrion birds, each one marked with firing arcs, reactor integrity, crew loyalty estimates, and breach points identified by scout reconnaissance. One by one, the command council manifested around the table. Scout Sergeant Carius appeared first, his hololithic image flickering in ash distortion from the lower hive. He looked like a corpse wearing warplate, every edge broken by camouflage, his eyes hidden behind helm lenses that reflected the shrine chamber beneath Vulskus. Scout Domitian and Scout Zosimus were not projected beside him. They were still knives beneath the skin of the world, and knives did not attend councils until after they had cut. Veteran Boethius of the First Company appeared next. His image was broad, immense, and scarred by transmission interference. Terminator honors hung from his projection as shimmering fragments of white light. He stood with the patience of a dreadnought interred in flesh, his features ruined by old wars, one cheek replaced by dark metal, one eye a red augmetic ember. He said nothing. Boethius rarely wasted breath before battle. His silence was not absence, it was pressure. Techmarine Marden manifested as a red-robed giant of metal and ceramite. Servo arms rose from his backpack like the limbs of some sacred arachnid. His voice, when he spoke, carried the layered resonance of machine code folded beneath Gothic. The orbital defense stations are impure in maintenance, but serviceable in function. Their spirits obey corrupt hands, not corrupt logic. They can be blinded. Apothecary Serevan appeared beside him in pale armor, washed grey by the hollow field. His narthecium was visible even in projection, blades folded, drills sealed, gene seed vaults locked at his waist. His expression was calm in the way of those who knew every warrior around him first as a brother, then as a future duty to be opened and preserved. Last came the mortal projection. General Acast Renner of the Astra Militarum appeared smaller than the others, though he stood straight with the discipline of a man who had survived enough wars to understand the presence of demigods without begging their approval. He wore the storm-grey greatcoat of the Vulskus Relief Army, his chest crowded with medals from campaigns that meant nothing in the face of the current judgment. Static cut through his image. His command bunker was somewhere in the outer trench continents, buried under meters of ferrocrete and prayer. Phasas allowed the silence to lengthen until every mortal in the strategium understood that speech would happen by his permission alone. Then he said, "State the enemy." Carius answered from beneath the world. "The planetary governor, Halbrecht Vornus, is compromised. House Vornus is compromised through at least 7 generations. The cathedral of the First Compliance is a false shrine. The relic within bears the eye. The lower clergy of 6 hive districts are doctrinally corrupted. 3 ranking confessors use coded Harusian cant during private rites. The Planetary Defense Command is split. 41% overtly aligned to the Synod. 28% obedient to compromised command authority. The remainder uncertain, frightened, or useful." Phasas did not correct the scouts' use of numbers. Reports were not liturgy. Reports were knives. Marden added, "Macro cannon arrays remain active across 9 orbital plates. Void shield strength across the primary hives is degraded by poor maintenance, but still sufficient to delay lance purification. Prometheum pressure systems are unstable. Unchecked bombardment risks global fuel ignition." "Then we do not bombard unchecked," Phasas said. Boethius spoke at last. "How many underarms?" Carius answered. "Hundreds of millions in rebel militia, if labor levies are fully armed. Millions in planetary defense formations. Thousands of tanks, mostly obsolete but functional. Heavy industrial walkers in the manufacturing belts. Penal mobs. Mutant labor brutes. Heretic engines in the refinery cores. Noble household guards gene-bulked beyond sanctioned tolerance." The hololithic display changed. Hive after hive opened in cross-section, revealing troop concentrations like infection beneath skin. Red light filled avenues, bunkers, cathedrals, lift shafts, ammunition vaults, hab stacks, and trench arteries. The scale was absurd by mortal measure. No single army could occupy it in any meaningful sense. No mortal mind could hold it whole without reducing it to numbers, sectors, and acceptable losses. General Renner swallowed. The sound came through the vox as a small wet click. "My lord," he said. Fazas looked at him. Renner continued, forcing each word out with care. "There are still loyal citizens inside the marked districts. My staff has identified evacuation corridors through Refinery Belt Kaf, the Western Pilgrim Road, and the ash causeways beneath Hive Baruch. If granted 6 hours, I can move a portion of the civilians clear before your descent." "No." The general stared at him. "My lord, with respect, these are Imperial citizens. Many resisted the Synod. Many have sent us signals. Some districts are still fighting with tools and stolen rifles in the name of terror. They occupy ground required for the kill corridors. My lord, they are loyal. They are present." Renner's image flickered. For a moment, anger overcame fear in the mortal's face. "You would deny extraction to those who held faith?" Fazas rested both, hands on the strategium table. The hololithic planet turned beneath his gauntlets, light crawling over ceramite fingers. A gate does not remain open because righteous men stand before it. A road does not cease to matter because innocents are upon it. Your evacuation corridors intersect 3 projected enemy withdrawals, 2 armor redeployment lines, 1 fuel artery, and the approach route for my second wave. If you fill them with civilians, you create obstruction. If you create obstruction, you preserve the enemy. If you preserve the enemy, you betray the loyal dead who have already purchased our knowledge with their suffering." Renner's jaw tightened. "They will be slaughtered." Valak turned his head toward the general's projection. "Innocence is not a shield against consequence. If the innocent stand upon a diseased foundation, the foundation must still be broken." The words fell into the strategium and remained there. No mortal officer answered them. Fazas turned back to the display. "You will seal the eastern approaches. Your artillery will range the Pilgrim Road when signaled. You will not open evacuation corridors unless I order it." "My lord," Renner said, voice low, "history will remember this." Boethius made a sound that might have been contempt or amusement. Valak answered before Fazas could. "History is a weapon maintained by the victorious. Ensure you remain useful enough to be mentioned." The general bowed his head, but not enough to hide the hatred in his eyes. "As ordered." Fazas dismissed him with a flick of one finger. The mortal projection vanished. For several breaths, only the Astartes remained around the world. Seravan spoke quietly. "The mortal command element is unstable." "Most mortal command elements are unstable," Boethius said. "Renner may disobey if civilian concentrations become visible." "He will be watched," Fazas said. "If he obstructs the operation, he will be removed." Valak's mouth was a hard line. "By censure or execution?" "That will depend on timing." The hololith shifted again. The false relic glowed in the heart of Hive Primaris, beneath the cathedral of the First Compliance. From it, pale lines spread through the surrounding hive, then down into older foundations, where the scout signals grew uncertain. Around those lines clustered command nodes, cult gatherings, priestly residences, noble bunkers, vox organs, gene vaults, ration stores, fuel regulators, and execution yards. Fazas studied it all, as one might study the load-bearing pillars of a condemned fortress. "We are not here to conquer Vulscus Secundus," he said. "The world already belongs to the Emperor. We are here to correct its failure to remember that fact." The display highlighted objectives as he spoke. The relic will be retrieved if uncontaminated beyond use, destroyed if not. The shrine network will be severed. The governor and his bloodline will be killed to the last verified heir. The True Dawn Synod will lose command cohesion within the first hour of descent. Orbital defense stations will be blinded or captured. Fuel arteries will be held, not ruptured. Manufactoria essential to Promethium tithe restoration will be preserved unless corruption proves structural. The planet will remain productive. Not clean, Carius said from below. No, said Phasus. Cleanliness is not required. Obedience is. Marden's servo arms clicked softly in the projection. Drop vectors require confirmation. The atmospheric burn will be severe over the southern Promethium seas. Storm walls over Hive Primaris are moving faster than predicted. Machine spirits of the pods have known worse skies, Valak said. They have also known worse pilots, Marden replied. No one laughed. Phasas magnified the cathedral of the first compliance. Its spires clawed upward from the hive crown, surrounded by statue gardens, skull plazas, pilgrim habs, execution balconies, and void shield emitters hidden under sainted domes. The lie had dressed itself beautifully. That did not offend him. Treachery often understood theatre better than loyalty. Carius, he said. The scout sergeant's projection sharpened. My lord, you will remain embedded until the first wave strikes. Your squad will mark the reliquary foundations and the underground exits. If the relic moves, you will follow it. If pursuit compromises the network, you will kill the bearer and await extraction. Understood. Domitian. A pause. Carius did not look aside, but Phasas knew the scout could hear through the same encrypted channel. Listening, Domitian said, his voice faint, buried beneath static and distance. You watched the informer die. Yes, my lord. You intervened? No, my lord. Why? The network outweighed the man. And the district? The district is ground. Ground is spent. Valak's eyes narrowed with approval. Phasas said, Remember the lesson when the sky opens. Many will scream our name as salvation. We are not salvation. We are correction. Yes, my lord. The channel closed. Boethius stepped closer to the hololithic table. First company assets stand ready. Terminator squad elements can teleport into the orbital defense platforms once Marden blinds the Auspex lattice. Granted, Phasas said. Leave enough alive to turn the guns. Boethius inclined his head. How many is enough? 1. The veteran's red augmetic eye brightened. Efficient. Serevan reviewed casualty predictions cascading along the table's edge. Expected losses among scout elements are significant if the lower hive rises before extraction. Expected losses are expected, said Phasas. They are neophytes. They are Warbringers. The apothecary accepted the answer. Not because it was kind, because it was true. Deep within the Deathmonger, something vast began to awaken. The deck trembled as launch mechanisms disengaged from their long silence. Warning lumen strips bled red along the strategium walls. Servo skulls chanted descent litanies in voices stolen from dead serfs. Across the ship, warriors of the 5th Company rose from arming chapels, sealed helms, checked bolters, chained blades to wrists, and accepted the final ministrations of chapter thralls. Dreadnought sarcophagi stirred in their cradles. Drop pod machine spirits growled as coordinates entered their iron dreams. Phasas took his helm from the lectern. The inside smelled of oil, incense, old blood, and the recycled breath of war. Valak placed his skull helm over his head and became judgment given a face. The hololithic world burned between them. Operation designation, Marden said. Phasas locked his helm into place. His voice emerged through the Vox grill, stripped of flesh and warmed by nothing. Black Foundation. The Strategium accepted the name. Cogitators carved it into active campaign records. Servo skulls repeated it in Binharik. Thralls whispered it into data slates. Somewhere in the ship's depths, hundreds of drop pods received their coordinates, one after another, each rune becoming a promise of impact. Phasas looked down at Vulscus Secundus as the first launch bay doors began to open beneath the Deathmonger. "Authorize descent," he said, and the battle barge unclenched its jaws. The surface of Vulscus Secundus had layers, and each layer had learned to lie. At the hive crowns, the nobles lied in gold. They knelt beneath stained glass images of the emperor, while their bloodline scribes burned true records in furnace vaults. They wore devotional masks at public rites and whispered older names in rooms lined with black marble. They sent sons to the planetary defense forces and daughters to sanctioned marriages and bastards to the corpse guilds, all while their house seals carried little curves and hooks hidden in the flourishes of heraldry. The Aquila flew above their palace towers. Beneath the paint, beneath the wax, beneath the oath parchment, something else watched with a single eye. In the middle hives, the priests lied in incense. Confessors spoke of sacrifice and obedience from pulpits made of bone, their voices rolling across hab galleries where workers had no choice but to listen. They promised salvation through labor. They promised absolution through pain. They promised the emperor saw every wound and counted every drop of blood spilled in his service. Then, when the choirs ended and the censers cooled, those same confessors descended into sealed reliquaries and made offerings to the relic whose true mark had been buried beneath gold. In the lower hives, the soldiers lied in iron. The planetary defense forces still wore Imperial cut uniforms and carried laser guns stamped with the forged sigils of Vulscus. Their officers shouted commands in High Gothic. Their banners bore saints. Their armor bore kill tallies from wars fought in the Emperor's name. Yet their armories had been moved without authorization. Their ammunition stores had been reclassified. Their vox traffic used devotional phrases that meant one thing to the administratum and another to the synod. They trained for urban defense while claiming to prepare for riot suppression. They placed heavy stubber nests at intersections no rioter would ever reach, but every loyalist relief column would need to cross. Below them all, in the underhive, the lie no longer bothered wearing a human face. Domitian moved through a sewage chapel on his belly, sliding beneath pipes slick with condensation and old filth. His armor was not the honored plate of a full battle brother. It was scout war gear, stripped down, darkened, and daubed by his own hand in ash grey, refinery black, and corpse brown. The colors broke him apart against stone, rust, soot, and meat. Even the lenses of his helm were dulled, treated with sacred paste to kill reflection. His cloak dragged behind him, stiff with dried sump matter and powdered bone. Ahead of him, Zosimus crawled under a row of prayer wheels made from vertebrae. The chapel had been built in the overflow throat of a waste artery. Every few minutes, thick black runoff thundered through the channel beneath the grated floor, carrying industrial acid, human excrement, corpse slurry, and the drowned remains of things that had not survived their work shifts. The walls were crowded with little shrines, not to saints, not truly. At first glance they looked imperial enough. Candles, wax seals, rusted aquilas, scraps of devotional parchment. But the candles were arranged in single circles. The seals were pressed with the wrong thumb. The aquilas had one head scratched blind, always the same head, always the same eye. Domitian touched the mark with 2 fingers and transmitted the image. Carius answered through bone induction, his voice silent to the world and absolute inside Domitian's skull. "Mark it. Move on." Domitian blinked confirmation and continued. They had been beneath the skin of Vulscus Secundus for weeks. Not days. Weeks. Long enough for mortal lungs to rot from the fumes. Long enough for ordinary soldiers to forget clean water and sunlight and the shape of open sky. Long enough for hunger to become a rhythm and stillness to become prayer. They crossed sewage chapels where rebels baptized infants in refinery runoff. They passed bone markets where corpse guilds sold femurs by weight, teeth by the handful, and skulls by devotional grade. They climbed through manufactorum crawl spaces so tight that even their neophyte frames had to compress and scrape, while machines hammered above them with enough force to shake rust from the dark. They crossed ash deserts beyond the hive walls, where dead workers were stacked inside windbreaks as insulation, bodies frozen into grey walls with limbs jutting like roots from packed soot. Everywhere they went, Carius marked the world for death, not all at once, not wastefully. Carius was no berserker. He did not dream of slaughter as lesser minds did. He divided the planet into functions: vox temples, gene vaults, food silos, noble bloodlines, defense controls, astropathic choirs, transit arteries, false saints preserved in amniotic tanks. Every target received a designation, a priority, an acceptable method of destruction, and a consequence if left intact. The Emperor's Warbringers did not rage through a world to prove their strength. They entered it like a disease of judgment. They infected its maps. They corrupted its safe routes. They listened at its confessionals. They learned its passwords, its water cycles, its feast days, its secret doors, its fuel pressures, its officer rivalries, its ration shortages, and the names of every man who could order a gate opened when the sky began to fall. Domitian had once wondered why the chapter did not simply descend in fire. Now he understood. Fire was sacred, but fire was not always enough. A world could burn and still remain disobedient in its roots. The roots had to be found first. Zosimus froze ahead of him. Domitian went still. The sewage chapel shook faintly. Boots on the stone above. Not workers, not pilgrims. Too measured, too heavy in formation. Domitian tasted metal through the filters of his helm as his senses narrowed. Auspex, sweepers. A moment later, pale green light spilled through cracks in the upper grating. It passed over pipes, idols, grease, black water, and bone. Men spoke above them in low voices. Signal trace came from this artery. Machine fault. The Synod does not tolerate machine fault. The Synod tolerates whatever the confessors tell it to tolerate. A blow landed. Flesh split. Someone spat blood. Speak with reverence. I spoke with truth. Truth belongs to the dawn. Domitian heard the charging whine of a last pistol. Then a short burst. A body fell heavily onto the floor above, blood dripping through the grating in warm beads that struck Domitian's cloak and vanished into the grime. The green Auspex light swept closer. Zosimus had nowhere to go. The crawl space ahead narrowed into a pipe throat too small even for him. The channel beneath was filling with runoff, rising fast with black pressure. Domitian's rifle was folded tight against his chest. He could kill the sweepers, but the shot reports would echo through the chapel and wake half the district. Zosimus looked back once. Then he slipped sideways into a processing vat. The vat stood half buried in the chapel wall, a rusted cylinder filled with butchered labourers waiting for slurry rites. Bodies had been hacked apart and dumped without order. Hands, ribs, heads, strips of back muscle, lungs split open by chemical inhalation, faces crushed during transport, eyes filmed white beneath a skin of grease. Zosimus sank into them without hesitation. He pulled a butchered torso over his helm and submerged beneath blood sludge, fat, and corpse gas. The Auspex beam passed over the vat. Domitian did not move. Above, one of the sweepers descended the ladder. His boots struck the chapel floor with cautious care. He wore the armor of the planetary defense forces, though the aquila on his breastplate had been cut and rejoined at the wrong angle. A scanner unit hung from his hands. Its needle twitched. "Residual heat," he said. "Where?" "The vat." Another voice laughed. "Everything in there was alive recently. That is what meat does." Gene trace is irregular. Domitian's finger tightened along the trigger guard. The sweeper approached the vat. His scanner clicked faster. One more step, and he would see the shift in mass. One more step, and he would notice the corpse surface trembling around Zosimus's submerged breath. One more step, and Domitian would have to kill him, then the others, then burn every trace, then run through corridors now awake and shrieking. The sweeper leaned over the vat. A dead child's head, swollen with gases, burst under the pressure of shifting meat. It ruptured with a wet pop, spilling black fluid and pale worms across the surface. The stench rolled outward in a visible haze. The sweeper gagged and stepped back. "Throne rot," he muttered. "It is just death heat." "Then stop courting it. We have another sweep at the gene vault." The Auspex light withdrew. Boots climbed. The chapel trembled as the patrol left, dragging their executed comrade behind them by one ankle. Domitian waited until their steps faded into the machine thunder of the hive. The vat surface broke. Zosimus rose slowly from the remains, gore sheeting off his helm and shoulders. A strip of intestine slid from his pauldron. Half a hand clung to the side of his respirator grill. He breathed once, deep and controlled, the multi-lung inside his engineered chest purging corpse gas and chemical vapor with a faint internal rasp. "Gene trace irregular," Zosimus voxed. "Your vanity endangers us," Domitian replied. Zosimus wiped clotted meat from his helm lens. "I will endeavor to smell less like the Emperor's work." Carius cut across the channel. "Enough." Both scouts went silent. "Proceed to the choir." They left the chapel through a maintenance wound behind a false altar and entered the manufactorum crawl spaces. Heat pressed against them like a hand. Above, assembly lines stamped armor plates for rebel vehicles still entered in Imperial tithe ledgers. Below, waste furnaces ate those too weak to stand at the machines. Children crawled inside gear housings to clear jams. Men with burned faces sang hymns between shifts because overseers beat those whose lips stopped moving. The words were Imperial. The cadence was wrong. The True Dawn Synod had taken everything, loyal, and hollowed it. It was not a single cult. It was a lattice. Planetary aristocrats funded it through house vaults and marriage contracts. Corrupted ministorum confessors gave it sacred language. Renegade planetary defense officers gave it guns, tanks, and access codes. Manufactorum guilds gave it labor mobs and industrial murder engines. Hidden relic worshippers gave it purpose. The common worker gave it flesh, whether willingly or beneath the lash. The rebellion was not rising from the gutters. It had been poured downward from the palaces, sanctified in the cathedrals, armed in the barracks, and fed by the dead. Near the gene vault of House Kell, Carius joined them in person. He emerged from a curtain of chain links with no more sound than drifting ash. His armor was daubed like theirs, but older, more carefully ruined by campaign craft. Scratches broke the chapter markings. Oil killed the shape of his weapons. A strip of flayed hide, taken from some local beast or man, hung over one shoulder to mimic the scavenger cloaks of corpse gilders. Even standing before them, he seemed like something the hive might reject as shadow. He carried 3 blood-sealed data slates and a severed noble hand. "The palm locks will open the vault?" Domitian asked. "No," said Carius. "The locks require a living pulse." Zosimus looked at the hand. Its fingers still twitched. "Stim wire," Carius said. They continued. The gene vault was not Astartes' gene seed. It was mortal vanity made sacred. Noble bloodlines slept in amniotic columns, curled fetuses, and vat-grown heirs floating in yellow fluid, while servo arms administered growth suppressants and loyalty toxins. House Kell had preserved itself for 12 generations beyond legitimate succession, building sons in secret, altering jaws, shoulders, eyes, and nerve response until each heir resembled the founder too closely to be natural. Carius marked the vault for sterilization. Beyond it lay food silos, guarded by men with flame carbines and oath brands carved into their tongues. Carius marked them for capture, not destruction. The population would need to eat when obedience returned. Noble bloodline archives were marked for incineration. Planetary defense controls were marked for assault. Astropathic relays were marked for silence after use. False saints preserved in amniotic tanks were marked for public burning. Then they reached the choir. It was beneath the cathedral of the first compliance, far below the public reliquary, lower even than the ossuary foundations. The chamber had no official map. It breathed heat, incense, and sickness through vents shaped like open mouths. The doors were bronze, 10 meters high, carved with Imperial scripture so dense that no mortal pilgrim would have noticed the hidden alterations. Every mention of the Emperor had been preserved. Every mention of obedience had been bent. Carius opened the doors with the still twitching hand. The sound struck first. Not music, not prayer. A wet vibration, 1,000 throats forced into harmony with machinery. Domitian had heard men scream in press yards, burn pits, and execution cells. This was worse because it had rhythm. The chamber beyond was vast. Thousands hung in vertical frames around a central vox organ, the size of a cathedral nave. Children, failed psychers, sanctioned choir rejects, and mind-scraped prisoners were wired into the machine by the skull, spine, and throat. Their eyes had been burned out. Their eyelids were stitched open over empty sockets. The tops of many skulls had been removed, leaving exposed brains lacquered in preservative gel and threaded with silver wire. Those brains pulsed in time with the organ's bellows. Tubes ran into mouths to force air. Hooks held jaws open. Cables disappeared into neck meat. Some still had hands and moved them weakly against their restraints. Most had no limbs left, only torsos suspended in iron and prayer parchment. Their voices poured through brass pipes. Obedience hymns, loyal words, treacherous frequencies. The vox organ used them to broadcast sanctified commands across the hive, hidden beneath prayers that every laborer heard from birth to death. Work, kneel, inform, bleed, gather, obey the synod, love the relic, trust the governor, hate the unbeliever, fear silence, fear mercy, fear terror when terror comes to correct you. Zosimus made a low sound. Domitian did not know whether it was disgust or restraint. Carius walked among the frames, marking the machine's nodes. His gaze moved from brain cluster to throat pump to signal amplifier. He paused before one of the children. The child's skull had been opened unevenly, as if by an impatient surgeon. A strip of parchment hung from his chest, naming him a volunteer of the dawn. His fingers trembled when Carius passed. Signal strength? Carius asked. Zosimus checked the auspex. Immense. It is masking half the hive's dirty traffic beneath devotional output. It will guide the pods through interference, Carius said. The Deathmonger can ride the signal down. Domitian looked at the frames. We leave it alive. Yes. The machine is suffering. The machine is useful. They are not a machine. Carius turned his helm toward him. For a moment, only the choir spoke. Thousands of ruined throats sang praises to an emperor whose servants stood among them and chose not to end their torment. Domitian held his sergeant's gaze. Carius said, "Necessary is the only mercy we are permitted." The words entered Domitian like a blade finding a seam in armor. He looked back at the choir. A child without eyes mouthed a hymn around the tubes invading his throat. Exposed brain tissue twitched beneath silver wire. Somewhere inside that broken body, something still lived, still knew pain, still waited for salvation. Domitian marked the signal spine for later destruction. Not now, later. That was the shape of their cruelty. Not indulgence, not pleasure, not madness, delay, measurement, use. As they withdrew, Zosimus lingered near a side altar hidden behind the vox organ's coolant pipes. It was small, black, and easy to miss beneath the machine's bulk. He brushed away a layer of fatty dust. Under it, a command sigil glimmered in old metal, not local, not noble, not ministorum. Domitian saw it through the shared lens feed. Carius went still. The sigil showed no eye, no eightfold star, no obvious mark of the traitor legions. It was a spiral of hooked script surrounding a void coordinate lock and a sequence of response intervals. A call had been made, not into the hive, not to the governor, not even to hidden ships within the system. Off-world, far-off world. Zosimus translated the outer cant in a whisper. A summons. Domitian felt the choir's hymn tremble through his bones. Carius leaned closer to the sigil. His voice entered the vox, flat and cold. Not heretic Astartes. The signal rune pulsed once, though no hand touched it. From somewhere beyond the system, beyond the burning world, beyond the patience of the Warbringers, something answered. The sky did not scream at first. For one breath, for one final heartbeat of Vulscus Secundus, pretending it had not been judged, the heavens remained as they had always been, orange with promethium fire, black with refinery smoke, torn by lightning that crawled across cloud banks like the veins of a dying god. The hive spires stood in their rusted arrogance, crowned by false cathedrals and defense towers, while billions labored, prayed, starved, informed, obeyed, rebelled, and lied beneath the same burning firmament. Then silence fell from orbit. It came before the fire. Every vox channel died at once. Every hymncaster choked. Every propaganda engine, every confession pulpit, every command frequency of the True Dawn Synod collapsed into a depthless black hush. Across the hive districts, rebel officers struck their headsets and cursed their machine adepts. Priests faltered mid-sermon. PDF colonels looked up from their tactical tables. Executioners paused with chain blades still wet. The blinded choir beneath the cathedral convulsed in its iron frames as the signal it had spent years poisoning was seized, inverted, and made into a beacon for wrath. High above the world, the Deathmonger opened its launch bays. Drop pods fell first. Hundreds of them, blackened by void shadow, their hulls daubed in the drab olive and ash markings of the Emperor's Warbringers. They came without warning klaxons, without heraldic broadcast, without the mercy of fear spreading ahead of them. They fell through storm walls and burning cloud, iron coffins shedding heat like meteors. Behind them came thunderhawks and storm ravens, their engines burning blue-white against the diseased sky. Boarding torpedoes spat from the battle barge toward orbital defense stations. Lance beams followed, spears of sun-bright wrath cutting through cloud cover and striking shield emitters, vox temples, auspex towers, and command bastions with surgical contempt. The silence lasted until the first pod punched through the roof of Hive Baruch. Then, every seized vox channel in the war zone screamed with one voice, "Bringers of war!" The cry rolled through the atmosphere, down maintenance shafts, across manufactorum floors, through bunker command rooms, over trenches packed shoulder to shoulder with guardsmen and rebels and labor mobs. It came from the Deathmonger, from the descending pods, from the helm grills of warriors who had waited weeks beneath the skin of the world. It came as judgment made sound. "Bringers of war!" A drop pod struck the roof of an armored transit station where rebel tanks were mustering beneath camouflage tarpaulins. The impact drove through layered ferrocrete, shrine mosaics, steel support ribs, and the turret of a Lehman Russ, whose crew had been singing a dawn oath to a false saint. The tank flattened beneath the pod like a beetle under a hammer. Fuel cells ruptured. Ammunition cooked off. Men became shadows in flame. The pod doors blew outward, killing the nearest survivors in a storm of shrapnel and steam. Olive-green giants emerged. Their bolters spoke before the rebels understood what had landed among them. The weapons bucked in transhuman hands, firing self-propelled mass-reactive shells that punched into flesh and armor before detonating. A PDF trooper took a bolt round in the sternum and came apart from the inside, ribs spreading outward as if invisible hands had opened him. Another lost his head in a burst of bone fragments, teeth, and helmet shards. A gunner behind a heavy stubber managed 3 rounds before a Warbringer put a shell through his weapon shield. The bolt detonated inside the gun housing and threw his arms away in opposite directions, leaving him standing for a heartbeat with blood spraying from both shoulders before he collapsed into his own smoke. More pods struck. One came down through a chapel roof, pulverizing the altar and the priest beneath it. Another smashed into a moving armor column, crushing 2 troop carriers and flipping a third onto its side, where its trapped crew cooked as promethium fire poured through the vision slits. A pod hit a crowded hab thoroughfare, and the shockwave burst mortal bodies against the walls in red sheets. The Warbringers emerged through steam, dust, and screaming, helm lenses burning cold through the murk. They did not slow for the wounded. They did not acknowledge pleas. They advanced according to the geometry of conquest, bolters firing in controlled patterns, chainswords snarling only when ammunition was better conserved for harder targets. Scout Sergeant Carius watched the first wave fall from beneath the cathedral of the First Compliance. He stood in the darkness with Domitian and Zosimus as the blinded choir thrashed in its frames. The vox organs screamed their brothers down through the interference, guiding pod after pod through the corrupt signal. The children and failed psychers wired into the machine bled from their empty eye sockets, brains pulsing under silver wire as the Warbringers used their torment as a landing beacon. Domitian looked at them only once. Carius did not. "Signal remains stable," Zosimus voxed. "Then it remains alive," Carius said. Above them, the cathedral shook as orbital fire stripped the void shield petals from its spires. At the planetary governor's palace, the rebels watched the wrong doors. They had barricaded the outer gates with adamantium slabs and execution engines. They had stationed gene-bulked brutes beneath statues of saints. They had layered the Grand Avenue with mines, tank traps, murder holes, and overlapping fields of heavy fire. They had placed priests upon the balconies to chant courage into frightened soldiers. They had chained loyalist prisoners to the gate pillars, flayed from throat to groin, their red bodies kept alive by crude medici pumps so their agony could warn others against faith in terror. Captain Phasas did not approach the gates. He came from below. Weeks earlier, Squad Carius had found the reliquary drains beneath the palace and marked the old foundation vaults with signal nails no larger than a mortal fingernail. Techmarine Marden had blinded the local machine spirits. The void shields were still active above. They were not active beneath. The floor of the governor's private reliquary exploded upward. Marble saints shattered. Reliquary glass became glittering knives. Ancient banners caught fire as a breaching charge opened the vault like a rotten rib cage. Phasas rose through the smoke at the head of the 5th Company command spear, his armor dark olive beneath ash and impact dust, his helm lenses black, his power sword unlit in his right hand, and a bolter locked to his left gauntlet. Behind him came Chaplain Valak, Crozius in hand, skull helm glaring through furnace smoke. Veteran Boethius followed with a squad of 1st Company warriors, his scarred plate already marked by stone dust and blood. More Warbringers climbed from the breach, spreading through the reliquary with the silence of executioners who had already read the sentence. The palace guards opened fire. The air became las light, autogun thunder, grenade blasts, and ricocheting stone. Phasas walked through it. Rounds struck his plate and sparked away. A cracked grenade detonated against his left pauldron, cracking paint and scorching wax seals. He answered with 3 bolter shots. 3 guards vanished into red mist and armor splinters. His brothers fired around him, not in panic, not in rage, but in measured cadence. Each shot was placement. Each detonation was correction. A noble brute charged him, swollen by illicit gene craft, until he stood half again, the height of a normal man. His skin was stretched purple across muscles grown too fast. Brass injector rigs pumped combat chemicals into his spine. He swung a 2-handed chain axe with enough force to split a mortal in armor. Phasas stepped inside the blow and fired once into the brute's abdomen. The bolt round detonated deep. The brute's belly opened across the middle, spilling loops of steaming intestine and shredded organs across the marble. The creature kept moving for 2 steps, driven by stims and stupidity. Phasas cut off its head without looking at it fall. The governor's officers tried to flee toward the inner blast doors. Valak intercepted them. They were still wearing their parade armor, polished black and gold, Aquilas displayed with careful reverence. One carried a white sash of surrender. Another had removed his sidearm and held it out with trembling hands. A third fell to his knees and shouted that he had always served the throne. Valak did not kill them. Not yet. He seized the kneeling officer by the throat and dragged him to the blast door's biometric shrine. The man clawed at the chaplain's gauntlet, boots scraping over blood-slick marble. "Open it," Valak said. "I surrender," the officer choked. "By the laws of Imperial command, I surrender." "Open it." The officer pressed his palm to the scanner. The shrine rejected him. Valak crushed one of his fingers slowly, joint by joint, until bone cracked through the skin. The man screamed and pressed his other hand to the plate. Runes turned green. Locks disengaged with a heavy metallic groan. Valak threw him aside and took the next officer. 3 doors opened that way. 3 biometric codes were spent. The officers lived only as long as their blood, eyes, and hands were useful to the advance. At the final threshold, one of them sobbed, "Mercy!" Valak looked down at him. "What serves the God Emperor is just. What harms his Imperium is false." His Crozius fell. The officer's skull burst under the blow, splashing the blast door with brain matter, teeth, and fragments of parade helm. The other 2 died in the next breath, one by bolt pistol, one by the chaplain's boot, driving his face through the edge of the biometric shrine. Fazas stepped past the corpses as the final door opened. A rebel colonel waited beyond it, with a command squad and a banner of the True Dawn Synod. His men were shaking. The colonel was not. He had the hollow eyes of a fanatic, the kind that had surrendered fear to certainty. "You waited too long," the colonel said. Fazas regarded him through the smoke. "You mistook delay for hesitation. You mistook silence for mercy. Both errors are now corrected." The colonel raised his sword and began to shout. Fazas shot him through the mouth. The bolt shell detonated at the back of his skull and painted the banner behind him with everything he had been. Beyond the palace, the world had become a furnace of war. In the outer trench continents, Astra Militarum, regiments advanced beneath burning skies and died by the millions. They went forward in ranks so dense that shell bursts lifted men in sheets. Basilisk batteries fired until their barrels glowed. Rebel artillery answered from bunker lines hidden beneath labor habs. Whole companies vanished under chemical barrages. Men drowned in mud that was half soil and half blood. Armored columns collided in ash storms, tank hulls burning nose to nose, while infantry swarmed around them like insects around carcasses. Commissars shot cowards until the cowards became too numerous and then died with the rest. Colonel Hest Vaughan's regiments held the eastern approaches as ordered. They watched civilian districts remain sealed, while rebel withdrawal routes filled with militia, supply crawlers, cult banners, and stolen armor. When the Warbringers' signal came, Vaughan gave the artillery command. The Pilgrim Road disappeared under fire. So did the Loyalists trapped upon it. The Astartes did not see most of it. They were not the wall of bodies. They were the blade tip. While mortal armies drowned the world in mass death, the Warbringers struck command organs, severing nerves, puncturing hearts, burning minds. A squad took a Vox temple and executed every cantor inside. Another captured a fuel artery before the Synod could rupture it. Dreadnoughts smashed through armor depots and left rebel tanks burning in rows. Thunderhawks screamed between hive spires, deploying kill teams into balconies and withdrawal shafts. Every strike landed where scouts had marked weakness. Every explosion fulfilled a patience measured in weeks. Inside the palace, veteran Boethius found the noble bodyguard. They came from the Hall of Compliance, 20 jean-bulked brutes in gold plate and black mail, their faces hidden behind masks of Imperial saints. Their hands gripped shock mauls, chain glaives, and powered axes. They had been made to guard bloodlines, not truths. They charged beneath statues of saints, whose marble eyes had been inlaid with black stones. Boethius met them without haste. His power sword took the first brute from shoulder to pelvis, the energy field turning armor, meat, and bone into a smoking split ruin. The second struck him across the helm with a shock maul hard enough to crack the marble column behind him. Boethius head-butted the brute's saint mask, shattering it inward and driving porcelain into the man's eyes. A third swung an axe that bit into Boethius's side and died when the veteran gripped his skull in one gauntlet and crushed until blood burst through the mask's mouth slit. More came. The sword's field flickered, damaged by repeated impacts, and a power surge from a brute's axe. It died with a crackle, leaving only dead metal in Boethius's hand. He did not discard it. He reversed the broken blade and drove it through a brute's throat, hooking the jagged edge behind the spine. Then he pulled. The head tore partly free, vertebrae snapping like wet twigs. Boethius used the corpse as a shield, took a chain-glaive strike into it, then slammed both body and attacker against a marble saint, hard enough to break the statue at the waist. The saint fell. Boethius dragged the broken sword out and used it as a butcher's hook, catching men under ribs, behind knees, through mouths, pulling them close enough for fists, elbows, and boots. By the time Phases entered the hall, Boethius stood amid a mound of ruined nobility. The floor was slick with blood and pulverized organs. Marble saints lay broken, their white faces painted red. One brute was still alive, bisected but breathing, hands scrabbling at the veteran's greave. Boethius looked down. "Household guard neutralized," he said. Phases passed him. "Continue." The palace fell in 13 minutes. Not surrendered. Fell. Its command staff were dead. Its gates opened from within. Its Vox Tower broadcast only static and the Warbringers' kill orders. Its chapel archives burned. Its hidden armory was seized. Its noble heirs were dragged from panic rooms and identified by gene scan before execution. Servants who had carried coded messages died beside officers who had written them. Priests who claimed ignorance were shot after their hands revealed ritual scars. The Warbringers did not ask for confession. They had brought evidence. Confession was redundant. But Halbrecht Vornus was gone. Phases found the escape route beneath the governor's throne room. It had opened behind an altar of polished black stone, descending into a shrine tunnel older than the palace above it. The air rising from below smelled of copper, incense, and opened bodies. The tunnel walls were lined with loyalists. They had been flayed and nailed upright, hundreds of them, maybe more, arranged in 2 red rows beneath guttering lumen strips. Their skin hung beside them like discarded robes. Some were still alive. Their eyes rolled as the Warbringers passed. Their mouths worked without sound, tongues cut out, lungs exposed between ribs where careful knives had peeled flesh away but left breath intact. Their blood ran down the walls into channels carved with devotional script. Domitian emerged from the shadows ahead, rifle low. "Governor evacuated through this passage 9 minutes before palace breach," he said. "Escort strength unknown. Shrine doors sealed behind him. Tracks show heavy bodies, priest cast, and at least 1 stasis conveyance." Carius appeared beside him, helm turned toward the tunnel wall. Phases followed the scout sergeant's gaze. There, painted across the stone in the blood of the flayed, were words written in ancient Chthonian script. The letters were crude but deliberate, each stroke dragged by a hand that knew the language as inheritance or infection. Valak translated aloud, his voice a growl from within his skull helm. "The War Master remembers." For the first time since the assault began, no Warbringer spoke. Then Phases raised his bolter and stepped into the tunnel. Chaplain Valak entered the cathedral of the First Compliance through a doorway made of burning men. They had been alive when the Warbringers reached them. Loyalists, traitors, penitents, pilgrims, informants, oath-breakers, perhaps all of those things at once. The Synod had chained them across the bronze gates in layers, body over body, ribs hooked through iron loops, throats opened just enough to bleed without swiftly dying. Their skins had been painted with prayers to the Emperor. Beneath those prayers, written in ash and old blood, were hidden marks that curved like hooks around a single watching eye. The Warbringers did not pause to read every lie. Valak raised his Crozius. Its power field awakened with a growl of caged thunder. "Open the way!" The brothers at his flanks obeyed, not with haste, not with fury, with bolter fire, promethium, and blade work measured to the necessity of the moment. Mass reactive shells struck the chained bodies and burst them into fragments of bone, meat, chain links, and devotional parchment. Flamers washed the gate in holy fire. Men who had survived flaying died in a breath, their screams briefly rising above the roar before their lungs cooked inside their opened chests. The brass doors behind them blackened and split. Hinges older than local dynasties shrieked as heat and explosive charges broke their sanctified housings. Valak walked through the smoke before the last pieces fell. The cathedral of the First Compliance spread before him like a continent pretending to be a shrine. Its nave alone could have swallowed lesser cities. Its transepts vanished into smoke haze and distance, lit by billions of votive candles burning in tiered walls that rose beyond mortal sight. Every candle was a prayer. Every flame was a small surrender of tallow, labor, breath, and hope. Their combined heat made the air shimmer around columns fashioned from saint bones, or bones claimed as saintly by records that now meant nothing. Skull servitors drifted on suspensor rigs between the pillars, their metal jaws opening and closing in cracked hymns. Some had been made from infants, some from priests, some from soldiers whose cranial plates still bore regimental tattoos beneath the devotional lacquer. Their voices did not harmonize. They scraped together like knives drawn across tombstone marble, repeating the sacred history of Vulscus Secundus. They sang of deliverance. They sang of the Primarch Robut Gilliman. They sang that this world had first knelt beneath the hand of the avenging sun, that the weapon in the central reliquary had been born in his presence, that the cathedral stood upon the place where Imperial truth had broken the planet's first tyrant. Valak listened as he advanced. The hymn was beautiful, if one cared for such things. It had cadence, it had structure, it had the weight of centuries. It had been sung to dying workers, newborn tithe, infants, condemned criminals, and noble heirs. It had been carried on vox towers across the burning oceans. It had taught billions where their obedience began. It was poison. Beauty did not lessen poison. Age did not sanctify corruption. Faith did not become true because enough throats had bled in its service. Captain Phasas entered behind him with the 5th Company command spear, his armor scorched from the palace assault, his bolter mag locked fresh, his power sword hanging inactive in one gauntlet. Veteran Boethius walked to his left, the broken remnant of his sword still mag locked to his thigh until a replacement could be drawn from the armory rights. Tech Marine Marden came in a wake of servo arms and red robes, his mechadendrites tasting the cathedral's corrupted machine signal. Apothecary Serevan followed, helm lenses tracking the bodies piled beneath the shattered doors, not with compassion, but with an instinctive catalogue of salvage, toxin exposure, and gene taint. Interrogator Malrek came last. The mortal wore carapace armor beneath a black storm coat, with the rosette of his master hidden under a fold of warded leather. His face was narrow, exhausted, and pale from years spent aboard ships and in sealed archives. He carried a plasma pistol at his hip and a data slate chained to his wrist. He did not flinch at the smell of cooked flesh, which spoke well of him. He did, however, look too long at the burning bodies in the doorway. Valak noticed. The chaplain noticed everything that might become weakness. 100 meters ahead, the nave floor shook. The martyr engines came from the side aisles. At first they resembled mining exoskeletons, the kind used in deep refinery excavations where human bone alone could not endure gravity stress and heat. Then they stepped fully into the candlelight and revealed the civilians welded inside them. Men from the hab stacks, men with labor brands, men with shaven skulls and prayer cuts across their cheeks. Their arms had been removed and replaced with industrial claws, rock drills, saw rigs, and hydraulic crushers. Their torsos were fused into metal cages. Thick cables entered their spines. Injector pumps hammered combat stims into their necks and hearts. Their mouths were wired open around bronze vox horns that screamed hymns as they charged. "Save us!" one of them shrieked through a machine voice. Another engine roared, "We die for the first compliance!" A third came apart before it finished speaking. A Warbringer heavy bolter opened fire from the left flank, each round punching into the engine's torso cage and detonating inside the man within. The civilian vanished in bursts of red steam and metal fragments. The exoskeleton staggered onward for several steps, dead flesh still welded to its frame, before Boethius met it shoulder first and drove it through a pillar of St. Bones. The column broke in a storm of relic fragments, skulls cascading across the floor like ivory rain. Valak did not order restraint. The martyr engines were civilians. They were also weapons. The distinction mattered only to those who had the luxury of dying confused. His Crozius smashed through the knee actuator of one engine and brought it down hard enough to crack the marble. The man welded into it sobbed through his vox horn, begging for his mother, his confessor, the emperor, anyone. Valak placed one boot on the metal cage and brought the Crozius down again. The head, the vox horn, and the upper spine became a wet crater rimmed with sparks. "False martyrdom," he said. "Denied." Around him, the Warbringers cut the engines down without visible hesitation. Bolters thundered. Chain blades chewed through hydraulic limbs, and the flesh trapped within them. Flamers filled the side aisles with oily fire. A mining claw closed around a brother's arm and crushed ceramite until the limb sparked at the elbow. The Warbringer stepped closer, rather than pulling away, pressed his bolt pistol to the trapped pilot's face, and fired. The martyr engine toppled backward, dragging the damaged arm with it, until another brother cut the claw apart with a combat blade. Malrek watched the slaughter with his jaw clenched. "These men may have been coerced," the interrogator said. Valak turned his skull helm slightly. "They were deployed. That is not an answer. It is the only answer required in battle." A martyr engine burst from the smoke behind Malrek, saw arm shrieking. Phasers shot it once through the pilot cage. The bolt detonated in the welded man's pelvis and blew the lower half of his body across the inside of the machine. The engine crashed down at Malrek's feet, twitching, its saw biting sparks from the marble. Phasers looked at the mortal. "Continue your objection when we are not being interrupted by evidence against it." They pushed deeper. The cathedral resisted, as if it were alive. Hidden gun nests opened from behind St. Mosaics. Penitent frames lurched from alcoves, each one carrying a nailed man whose pain fed crude targeting spirits. Confessors in soot-black vestments ran among the pews, screaming absolutions and detonating suicide charges when cornered. The Warbringers answered each tactic by removing it. No speeches, no triumph, no relish. They were not berserkers frothing at the sight of blood. They were not sadists whispering to pain. They were not theatrical killers decorating themselves in the moment of death. That made them worse. A berserker could be baited. A sadist could be distracted. A zealot seeking spectacle could be drawn into waste. The Emperor's Warbringers killed as men might cut rotten beams from a hab before collapse. Their cruelty wore the face of discipline. Their atrocities marched in formation. Their faith did not soften them. It sharpened the edge. At the heart of the cathedral, the central reliquary waited beneath a dome of blackened gold. The pilgrims had not fled. Thousands knelt around the sanctum floor, packed shoulder to shoulder, their foreheads pressed to the stone, while skull servitors circled above them. Some wept, some prayed, some whispered that the angels had come, some called the Warbringers murderers. Many did both, because terror broke doctrine into fragments. The priests of the reliquary stood in a ring around the glass cage. Their robes were white, though the hems were stained from walking through blood. Each bore the aquila openly at the chest. Each bore the hidden eye beneath the tongue, revealed only when they opened their mouths to chant. Valak advanced through the kneeling masses. Pilgrims reached toward him. Some touched his greaves with trembling hands. Some begged for protection. Some spat on his armor. A man rose with a knife and plunged it toward the chaplain's hip joint. Valak caught his wrist and broke it without slowing. The knife fell. The man dropped with it, clutching a forearm folded backward at an impossible angle. The priests began the final hymn. Malrek stepped forward quickly, voice tight with urgency. "Chaplain, Captain, the relic must be contained." Valak stopped before the glass cage. Inside lay the bolt pistol. It was ancient, corroded, blackened by age, incense smoke, and centuries of ritual oils. Its grip had been wrapped in gold wire. Purity seals covered the casing in layers so thick they looked like scales. The muzzle was cracked. The firing mechanism was fused by time or deliberate damage. Yet even ruined, it carried presence, not holiness. Something older than the worship around it. A weapon from an age when the Imperium had still been an advancing storm, and its sons had not yet divided themselves into loyal and damned. Malrek lifted his chained data slate. If this weapon is truly from the Great Crusade, it may possess historical significance beyond this world. The association with Guilliman may be false, but the underlying provenance requires examination. If it bears the eye, that makes it more important, not less. The Ordo will demand study. Valak did not look away from the relic. False holiness is more dangerous than open heresy. Open heresy can be traced. False holiness can be understood. We need to know how this world was compromised. We know enough. You know enough to burn it. That is not the same as knowing enough to prevent another Vulskus. Fazas approached the reliquary and studied the weapon. Marden. The tech marine extended a servo arm. A spray of solvent hissed across the bolt pistol's casing, eating through grime and devotional lacquer. Gold wire blackened and peeled away. Seals curled into ash. Corrosion wept chemical tears down the weapon's side. The mark emerged beneath. The eye of Horus stared from the metal. The pilgrims nearest the reliquary began screaming. Some denied it. Some beat their faces against the floor. One priest bit off his own tongue and spat it at Valak's feet, perhaps to conceal the mark beneath it before anyone could see. Boethius shot him through the spine. The body dropped in a white robe that rapidly became red. Malrek stared at the eye. For all his arguments, for all his inquisitorial training, the sight had weight. A world's faith collapsed in that revealed symbol. Billions of prayers, billions of candles, billions of lives spent in devotion to a lie that had worn Imperial skin. Even the interrogator's face changed as he understood the magnitude. Not simply corruption, inheritance, a wound preserved as a relic, venerated until the infection became culture. "Seal it," Malrek said, though his voice had lost certainty. "I will take responsibility. My master will judge its fate." Fazas turned toward him. "You will return as the servant who witnessed its destruction," the captain said, "or you will die as a radical who protected it." Malrek's hand drifted near his plasma pistol. Every Warbringer in the sanctum marked the motion. It was a small thing, a mortal impulse, pride, duty, fear, ambition, perhaps even courage. Valak wondered which name Malrek would give it before death, if granted the time. The interrogator looked from Fazas to Valak, then to the bolt pistol in the glass. The eye watched them all. Slowly, Malrek lowered his hand. "Eyewitness," he said. Valak raised his Crozius. The reliquary glass shattered under the blow, exploding outward in glittering shards. Pilgrims screamed as fragments cut faces, eyes, and throats. Valak reached into the cage, seized the ancient pistol, and held it up before the kneeling thousands. "This is what you loved," he said. His vox amplified the words until they thundered through the nave. "This is what your fathers knelt before. This is what your priests protected. This is what your dead carried into the Emperor's sight and called holy." The pilgrims wailed. Valak threw the pistol onto the altar. "Bring Prometheum." Warbringers moved at once. Fuel canisters were carried forward from the flamer teams. They poured the sacred accelerant across the altar, across the relic, across the shattered cage, across the priest corpses, across the scroll archives stacked behind the sanctum walls. A priest crawled toward Valak, hands clasped, eyes rolling with terror. "We did not know," he sobbed. "We did not know." Valak looked down at him. "Then your ignorance served treason." The priest died with a bolt round through the chest, his ribcage opening in a red burst that drenched the altar steps. Phasas gave the wider order. The cathedral archive was to burn. The reliquary orders were to burn. The priesthood registers were to burn. The pilgrim masses were to be contained until interrogation teams separated the useful from the irredeemable. But when the crowd surged in panic, the Warbringers fired into them with disciplined restraint, which was to say they killed exactly enough to force obedience. Bodies fell in heaps among the candles. Men trampled the wounded, while skull servitors continued singing with cracked devotion. A flood of blood ran between votive stands and carried floating flames across the marble. Valak ignited the altar himself. Fire took the Prometheum in a single hungry breath. The relic disappeared beneath white-orange flame. The eye blackened. Gold wire melted. Purity seals became ash. The pistol that had poisoned Vulskus for centuries burned among the bodies of the priests who had guarded it and the records that had sanctified the lie. The cathedral became an image the chapter would not record in full. Billions had believed. Billions had labored under a false origin, false saint, false compliance, false relic. The truth had been found, and the Warbringers chose not to preserve it. They chose flame. They chose erasure. They chose the Imperium's useful lie over the enemy's sacred one. Malrek watched the relic melt. "You are destroying evidence," he said. Valak's skull helm turned, firelight burning in its eye lenses. "No," he said, "we are denying worship." The altar split from the heat. Beneath the cracking marble, something screamed. It was not mortal, not mechanical, not merely the failure of stressed stone or the shriek of heated metal. It rose from below the cathedral, from foundations older than the official city, from beneath the choir, beneath the reliquary, beneath every polished lie Vulskus had built over its first wound. The sound punched through vox filters and helm seals. Pilgrims vomited blood. Servo skulls fell from the air, their hymn engines bursting. Several mortal thralls dropped dead at once, eyes cooked white in their skulls. The astropathic scream tore upward through the cathedral and outward into the warp. For one heartbeat, Valak heard vast distance answer. Something in the immaterium screamed back. War on Vulskus Secundus did not have a front. It had wounds. They opened across the planet in lines of fire visible from the void, each one a surgical cut that immediately became an infection of men, machines, smoke, and blood. Hive continents erupted one after another, as though the world itself had been struck by a hammer and found hollow.
Remember, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Support helps.
Trenches lit with las fire. Manufactorum belts cracked open under shelling. Refineries vented burning vapor into the sky. Cathedrals became artillery nests. Hab towers became tombs. Ration roads became rivers of bodies. The Prometheum seas threw their orange light over everything, making the war below look less like a campaign than damnation given geography. The rebel armies came in impossible multitudes. They came from the labor districts in grey millions, worker militias carrying stub rifles, mining charges, chain hooks, furnace blades, and stolen laser guns. They came with oath brands fresh on their cheeks, and the hidden mark of the synod burned under their tongues. They came from penal vaults, murderers and tithe failures released into the streets with explosive collars around their throats and promises of absolution nailed through their ears. They came in mutant labor clans from beneath the refinery stacks, hulking men with too many joints, swollen arms, split jaws, and skin thickened by generations of chemical exposure. They came in planetary defense formations with proper boots, proper armor, proper guns, and wrong souls. Their tanks rolled in columns through ash storms, old battle cannons coughing, hull plates painted with Imperial scripture that no longer belonged to them. Against them stood the Imperium. The Astra Militarum filled the trench continents with bodies and banners. They came from off-world regiments ferried in beneath the Deathmonger's shadow, from loyalist remnants of Vulskus who had not yet been purged, from armor brigades whose engines drowned out the screams of infantry dying beneath their treads. Their officers shouted through static. Their commissars executed hesitation. Their priests blessed artillery shells as servitors hauled them into breaches still hot from the last firing. The Adeptus Mechanicus advanced beside them in red files of Skitari, radium carbines spitting poisoned light, galvanic rifles cracking through smoke, bionic limbs clattering over broken stone in obedience to machine hymns. Tech priests moved behind them on segmented legs, blessing cogitator nodes and condemning corrupted engines with equal ritual gravity. Cybernetica automata strode through shell bursts, their iron bodies punched and scorched but uncaring, fists crushing rebel barricades into heaps of wet metal and wetter men. Night engines walked through the firestorms like wrathful cathedrals on legs. Their banners were blackened by ash, their ion shields flickering under the impact of rebel macro shells. One strode through a hab block rather than around it, its vast feet reducing whole floors of screaming bodies into paste beneath crumbling ferrocrete. Its battle cannon fired into a rebel armor square and erased 20 tanks in a single rolling bloom of pressure, flame, and metal fragments. Behind it, surviving guardsmen cheered until counter-battery fire landed among them and turned their triumph into red mist. The Imperial Navy owned the burning sky only by contest. Wings of atmospheric craft screamed between hive spires and storm walls, dropping ordnance into armor columns and dying by the score to defense lasers and flak towers. Aircraft fell constantly. Some came down as intact spears of fire, burying themselves in streets and vaporizing crowds. Others broke apart slowly, scattering wings, engines, pilots, fuel, and burning ammunition over districts already drowning in war. And through all of it, the Emperor's Warbringers did not behave like an army of numbers. They were too few for that. A few companies of Adeptus Astartes could not occupy hive continents holding billions. They could not stand shoulder to shoulder across trench systems, longer than nations. They could not replace the Guard, the Mechanicus, the Navy, the Night Households, the artillery crews, the tank regiments, the labor battalions, the corpse haulers, or the endless grinding machinery of Imperial war. They were the blade. They struck where the body needed cutting. A squad of intercessors dropped onto a command basilica in Hive Luthar and killed the 12 men coordinating 3 rebel army groups. The armies did not immediately stop. Armies that vast never stopped cleanly. They staggered. Orders contradicted. Reserves moved into artillery zones. Tanks halted under open sky. Worker militias advanced without armor and died in heaps beneath loyalist heavy bolters. A dreadnought of the 5th Company, Brother Asterion, struck the western manufactorum gates. The gates were 9 meters thick, reinforced with adamantium ribs and sanctified by corrupt priests who had daubed false blood over the locking shrines. The dreadnought walked through the approach under direct fire, Lascanon beams scoring his sarcophagus, rockets bursting across his hull. He reached the gate, drove his siege claw into the seam, and tore until the locking teeth snapped. Behind him, Techmarine Marden's signal ghosts invaded the machine spirit, shackled it, beat it silent with command catechisms, and forced the doors open. Loyalist armor poured through. Rebel defenders trapped in the gate tunnel were crushed under tank treads before they could flee. Scouts moved unseen ahead of every strike. Carrius marked lance targets from a collapsed bell tower. Domitian crawled through a drainage spur beneath a rebel fuel depot and planted a beacon in the throat of a pipe. Zosimus lay beneath ash beside a Vox temple, listening to the enemy confess their redeployments in coded hymns. When the Deathmonger fired, its lances did not fall as anger. They fell as answers. One struck the fuel depot Domitian had marked. The beam came down through cloud and smoke as a white pillar, touched the pipe throat, and turned the depot into a second sun. Tanks, men, servitors, ammunition stockpiles, and prayer banners disappeared inside the blast. The shockwave ran through 6 streets, stripping skin from those not sheltered by walls, and flinging bodies against manufactorum gates, hard enough to leave human shapes in blood. Rebel infantry nearby did not burn so much as become heat and memory. Colonel Hest Vaughan saw the light of it from the command trench east of Hive Baruch. He had been awake for 4 days. His face was grey beneath soot, his beard crusted with dried blood from a cut across his cheek, his left arm bound in a pressure splint where shrapnel had torn through muscle. Around him, Vox officers screamed into dead channels. Orderlies carried ammunition crates. A sanctioned preacher with no legs crawled along the trench floor, blessing boots as men ran past him toward the firing steps. The walls shook each time the rebel guns answered. Vaughan watched the tactical slate in front of him as red marks flooded into 3 civilian districts. Not soldiers, not all of them. The district returns showed Hab populations still inside, loyal signatures as well as corrupted ones. Hidden devotional signals still transmitting Imperial codes. Men who had resisted the Synod. Men who had sent pleas through sewage lines and ration stamps and machine prayers. Men who had believed that when the Emperor's angels came, they would know the loyal from the damned. The Warbringers' artillery request painted all 3 districts black. Vaughan keyed the command channel with a trembling finger. This is Colonel Vaughan to Warbringer Command. Strike request intersects civilian concentrations. Repeat, civilian concentrations remain within the marked districts. Loyalist signals are confirmed. Static answered. Then Phases spoke, his voice carrying the cold iron calm of orbit and ceramite. Enemy withdrawal routes intersect the same districts. Rebel armor is entering the Hab corridors. Synod command elements are using civilian density as concealment. My lord, there are still thousands transmitting the oath code. There are hundreds of thousands of enemy bodies moving beneath them. They held faith. They occupy required ground. Vaughan looked beyond the trench lip. In the distance, Hive Baruch burned in stacked layers, lower districts dark, middle districts burning, upper cathedrals lit by lance fire. His men waited along the artillery line, hands on firing levers, eyes avoiding him. He knew what refusal meant. Not for him. His life had been spent on worse tables than this. Refusal meant the enemy escaped through those districts. Refusal meant rebel armor hit the loyalist flank. Refusal meant the Synod preserved command units that the Warbringers had marked for destruction. Refusal meant the war lengthened, and lengthening war killed more men than cruelty ever admitted. Still, he saw the civilian signals blinking. "My lord," Vaughan said, voice raw, "some of those citizens are loyal." Phases answered without anger. "A loyal citizen's final duty may be to deny shelter to the enemy. Fire." The channel went dead. Vaughan closed his eyes for half a breath. Not long enough for prayer. Long enough to hate. Then he raised his hand and dropped it. The basilisks fired. The world disappeared in thunder. Gun after gun hurled shells over the trench lines, the barrels recoiling like the limbs of chained beasts. The first impacts landed in District Solon, then Kaf, then the lower pilgrim blocks beneath Hive Baruch. Hab towers folded inward. Whole floors pancaked down in roaring collapses, grinding families, rebel militia, loyal cells, wounded men, hidden priests, and sleeping laborers into the same choking dust. Corpse silos burst under direct hits, vomiting decades of stored dead into the streets in avalanches of limbs, torsos, skulls, and rancid preservation fluid. Ration vats split open and flooded avenues with boiling corpse fat and nutrient sludge, thick enough to carry severed hands and helmets in the current. Rebel infantry running through the districts were churned into black-red mud beneath the shelling. Some died cleanly, which was to say they were simply gone. Others were blown open and left crawling through ash with their organs trailing behind them like devotional ropes. A militia column tried to take shelter in a shrine tunnel moments before a shell punched through the roof and detonated in the packed space. The tunnel exhaled bodies. Men came out in pieces. A head struck a wall and stuck there, flattened by heat and pressure, its mouth still open. The artillery did not stop when the screams began to carry over the Vox. Screams were not a countermand. Far above, Boethius and the First Company entered the war from another angle. Teleportation tore them into existence inside Orbital Defense Bastion Helkan, a fortress station hanging over the planet's northern Fire Sea. One instant, the command crew stood beneath their corrupted banners, shouting targeting orders for macro cannon arrays. The next, the air cracked with caged lightning, and the veterans of the Emperor's Warbringers stood among them in Terminator plate. Boethius appeared inside a cluster of rebel officers. His arrival crushed one against a console, pulping the man between ceramite and brass. The others had time to look up, not time to live. Storm bolters roared. At such range, there was no battle, only butchery. Mass reactive shells tore men apart and filled the command pit with fragments of uniform, bone, teeth, augmetic plugs, and data cables ripped from skulls. A rebel lieutenant managed to draw a bolt pistol. Boethius took the shot on his pauldron, stepped forward, and drove his fist through the man's chest. The veteran's gauntlet emerged from the officer's back, holding a fistful of spine and shredded lung. The bastion's bridge became a slaughterhouse. First Company warriors advanced through corridors built for mortal crews, their armor scraping the walls, their weapons speaking in short bursts. Crewmen died at stations, in prayer alcoves, beneath ammunition lifts, inside turret wells. Some begged that they had only followed orders. Some shouted loyalty to terror. Some spat curses for Dawn and the Emperor. Boethius made no distinction, unless one of them knew a code. A senior gunnery officer was dragged from under a console by the ankle. He was old, bald, shaking, and covered in other men's blood. "Access," Boethius said. The officer shook his head. "I cannot. The Synod will curse my soul." Boethius gripped the man's skull, not hard enough to crush. Not yet. The Synod is not here. The officer opened the firing shrine with his eye, his hand, and his voice. When the bastion's macro cannons accepted new command, Boethius broke his neck and let him fall. A moment later, Bastion Helkan turned its guns on Hive, Luthar. Macro shells fell from orbit with divine indifference. Rebel-held spires vanished under impacts that shattered kilometer-high towers and sent them falling through lower districts like mountains collapsing into cities. Defense lasers that had fired on Imperial craft went dark, then exploded from within. The Bastion's own crew, those still alive in sealed compartments, screamed through internal Vox as First Company veterans moved from deck to deck, purging command centers, reactor shrines, and ammunition sanctums. On the surface, the consequences spread faster than understanding. The Synod began to lose the war it had expected to ignite. Its rebel masses still fought, its tanks still rolled, its priests still screamed into whatever Vox towers remained, its martyr engines still clawed through loyalist lines. But its command organs were dying, its roads were marked, its fuel arteries were seized, its air defense was blinded, its hiding places had become targets, its false saints were burning in their tanks. Yet beneath the cathedral of the First Compliance, Scout Sergeant Carius found no panic in the enemy's deepest signals. He found rhythm. The astropathic scream that had answered Valak's burning of the relic still trembled in the lower foundations. It moved through old conduits, dead machine systems, and stonework older than the hive. Domitian followed him through a tunnel where the walls sweated blood from cracks that had not existed an hour before. Zosimus carried the Auspex unit, its rune display flickering between geological returns and impossible void readings. "They are not trying to hold the planet," Domitian said. Carius did not slow. "No. They are not trying to defeat the Guard. No." Zosimus looked down at the Auspex. The readings painted layers beneath the capital hive, but the deeper levels refused to remain consistent. Stone became negative space. Metal appeared where no construction record existed. Heat signatures pulsed too slowly to be machinery and too regularly to be geological instability. "They are feeding time," Zosimus said. Carius glanced back. The scout continued, voice low. "Every death above, every hymn through the choir, every shell fired into the districts, every burning shrine. It is not defense, it is activation." Domitian understood then, and wished he did not. The rebellion had never expected to win Vulscus Secundus. It had expected the Imperium to come. It had expected fire. It had expected massacre. It had expected the Warbringers to do what the Warbringers did best, to cut, burn, break, and cleanse until the planet itself drowned in sanctioned violence. The Synod had built a war as an offering. Carius reached a sealed foundation gate beneath the old reliquary line. It had been hidden behind walls of St. Bone and votive slag. The surface was not Imperial, not Mechanicus, not local. The metal drank light. Its edges hurt the eye. Across it, beneath centuries of lacquer and brick, were old kill runes in Chthonian battle cant. Marden's distant machine signal entered the scout's channel, thin and strained through the earth. "Confirm visual." Zosimus transmitted the image. Silence followed. Then the tech marine spoke again, and for the first time Domitian heard something like unease beneath the machine-filtered voice. "Those are Lunar Wolves-era kill codes." Carius stared at the gate. The Auspex display unfolded beneath the capital hive, layer by impossible layer, revealing a buried structure vast enough to anchor the city above it. Not a bunker, not a shrine, not a tomb, a vault, pre-imperial in construction, sealed during the age when the Lunar Wolves still wore the Emperor's light and had not yet become the shadow that broke the galaxy. From behind the gate came a slow, deep pulse, like a heart remembering how to beat. The gate opened only after Tech Marine Marden taught it fear. It did not yield to command codes. It did not answer the sigils of Mars. It did not recognize the authority of the Aquila, the oaths of the Adeptus Astartes, the seal of the Fifth Company, or the machine prayers poured into its dead receptors. For 3 minutes, the buried vault remained sealed beneath the capital hive, its black metal skin drinking lumen light, its old kill runes glimmering with a malice older than the Imperium's current lies. Then Marden stepped closer. His servo arms unfolded around him like the limbs of an iron saint. Data spikes stabbed into the gate. Incense burners fixed to his backpack coughed black smoke. His Vox grill became a layered growl of Binharic, High Gothic, and machine cant that made Domitian's teeth ache inside his skull. Marden did not plead with the mechanism. He did not soothe its machine spirit. He named its failures. He recited corrosion patterns, broken logic circuits, power impurities, and the decay of its isolation rights. He spoke to it as a judge speaks to a condemned engine. The gate trembled. Marden's red lenses burned brighter. "Your purpose has ended," the Tech Marine said. "Open, or be made into salvage." Something deep inside the gate screamed without sound. The black metal split down the middle. Promethium vapor breathed from the crack, slow and yellow, carrying with it the scent of oil, grave dust, old blood, and air that had not known open circulation since the Great Crusade. The darkness beyond did not look empty. It looked occupied by waiting. Captain Farzas entered first. He carried his bolter raised, his power sword dormant but ready, his armor scarred by the burning cathedral and palace war. Chaplain Valak walked beside him, skull helm catching the weak lumen glow, Crozius gripped in both hands like a sentence waiting to fall. Boethius followed in heavier plate, one shoulder newly repaired with field clamps, the broken sword gone, and a fresh blade mag locked across his back. Carius, Domitian, and Zosimus moved in a looser pattern behind them, scouts slipping through the angles between giants. Apothecary Cerevan came next, pale armor marked by ash, Narthesium folded but awake. Marden entered last, dragging cables of red light from the gate's wounded spirit. Behind them, the war continued above. Through stone, through ash, through kilometers of hive foundation, Domitian could still feel it. Basilisk thunder, Prometheum detonations, the groan of collapsing habstacks, the distant hymn of aircraft engines dying in flame. The planet was still being murdered back into obedience, but down here the sound was a memory pressed flat by weight. The passage descended. There was no open battlefield beneath the hive, no sky, no battle line, no roaring army to measure courage against, only black tunnels and dead vox, only walls that sweated promethium in slow amber threads, only old bolter casings half embedded in dust, stamped with manufacture marks extinct for 10,000 years, only scratches on the walls from prisoners whose bones had become part of the floor. Domitian saw them as they passed, fingernail grooves, teeth marks, words cut in crude Gothic, names, pleas, oaths, curses. Some were written in blood that had fossilized into brown glass. Some had been carved so deeply that the prisoner must have broken every finger doing it. We were loyal. No reply came. We opened the gates. No reply came. The moon wolves came with the Emperor's light. No reply came. Zosimus slowed near one wall, helm tilted. "Do you hear that?" Domitian listened. The Vox was dead. All channels were dead. Even the command link to the surface had become static and heartbeat clicks. Yet something whispered through the helmets piled in a side alcove ahead. Not through their Vox units, through the empty mouths of the dead helms themselves. "They came in white," a voice breathed. Another answered, thin and dry. "They came with oaths." A third chuckled from inside a crushed rebreather. "Then they taught us compliance." Valak turned his skull helm toward the alcove. His Crozius flared once. The whispers stopped. "Echo phenomena," Marden said, though the mechanical contempt in his voice did not hide caution. "Demonic residue," Valak said. "Residual psychic imprint is also possible." Valak looked at the tech marine. "All lies acquire names to protect themselves." Farzas continued downward. "We do not halt for ghosts." The tunnel widened into a failed cathedral. It had been built below the current one, and perhaps below another before that. Its roof had collapsed in places, leaving heaps of stone ribs and shattered saints, half buried in ash. The statues were not Imperial saints, not all of them. Some wore armor that resembled the early Legiones Astartes. Some held wolf-headed standards. Some had been defaced with chisels, their faces cut away and replaced with crude aquillas. Domitian stepped over a cracked mosaic. Beneath layers of soot, he saw the truth the upper hive had buried. Warriors in white plate standing beneath storm skies, a world kneeling, a tyrant dragged in chains, a weapon lifted in triumph. The same bolt pistol that had burned on Valak's altar, painted here before centuries of correction, had buried it beneath false names. Not Gilliman, not the Ultramarines, lunar wolves. The sanctioned history of Vulscus Secundus had not merely been mistaken, it had been rewritten to cauterize shame. The world had been brought into compliance by warriors, who later turned traitor. The planet had worshipped a weapon from that first conquest, because no one had dared tell the masses that their sacred founding rested in the shadow of Horus. Domitian looked to Valak. The chaplain stared at the mosaic for a long moment, then brought his Crozius down. The power field shattered the image. Painted warriors became dust and shards under his blow. "That was evidence," Domitian said before restraint could silence him. Valak turned slowly. "It was an infection. It was truth." "It was fact," Valak said. "Do not mistake the two." Domitian held his silence. Valak stepped close enough that the skull helm filled Domitian's vision. "Truth is not whatever happened. Truth is what endures in service to the throne. A fact that weakens obedience is a blade in the enemy's hand. A lie that preserves mankind may be armor. Learn the distinction, Scout, or you will die clutching accuracy, while better men preserve the Imperium." Phasas did not rebuke him. That was the terror of it. Not Valak's certainty alone, but the calm acceptance of the others. Serevan watched. Marden recorded. Carius stood still as a shadow. Boethius looked down the tunnel for enemies, unconcerned with whether history had screamed as it died beneath the Crozius. They moved on. The next chamber was colder. Stasis racks lined the walls in rows that receded into darkness. Many had failed. Within them hung men who should have been dust. Some were mummified upright, flesh tight over skulls, eyes shrunk to black seeds. Others had been preserved unevenly, half living tissue and half ancient rot. Their uniforms belonged to no current regiment. Their armor was primitive by modern standards, marked with symbols of a rebellion erased before any living mortal on Vulscus had drawn breath. Domitian stepped closer to the nearest rack. The man inside had no scalp. His skull had been drilled open with careful circular holes, each one filled with metal pins and strips of oath parchment. The script was tiny, precise, and repeated the same devotion across bone, brow, and exposed brain tissue. Horus, Horus, Horus. The name had been written into him until there was no room left for any other thought. "He is alive," Serevan said. Domitian looked again. The mummified rebel's chest moved once, barely, a dry, shallow shift after 10,000 years of imprisonment. Then his mouth opened. Dust spilled over his teeth. "Is the War Master victorious?" he whispered. Valak shot him through the head. The bolt round detonated inside the rack, bursting the ancient skull apart and spraying blackened brain matter, bone pins, and oath parchment across the glass. Other racks began to stir. Fingers twitched, teeth clicked, dried eyes opened under milky film. 1,000 prisoners from the dawn of Imperial conquest woke to hear the war they had waited for. Phasas raised one hand. The Warbringers fired. The chamber became thunder trapped in a tomb. Stasis glass blew outward. Ancient bodies burst apart in wet black clouds. Some died as mummies, shredding into dust and bone fragments. Others died too fresh, their preserved organs rupturing under bolt impacts, their skulls flowering open, their torsos kicking against restraints as muscle remembered pain after millennia of silence. One tore free of his rack with a strength that did not belong to dead flesh. Carius put a round through both knees. Zosimus finished him with a knife through the eye socket. Above the gunfire, the empty racks began whispering, not pleading now, laughing. Marden burned the control node with a plasma cutter, and the laughter dissolved into static. They pressed deeper, into a hall of banners. Most had rotted into threads. One remained intact, hanging from a crossbar of black iron. It was white once, though age had yellowed it like old bone. A wolf head marked the cloth, proud and lunar pale, but at its center, someone had later painted the eye. Or perhaps the eye had grown there. Blood welled from the symbol. It did not drip down. It crawled upward. Thick red beads moved against gravity, climbing the cloth in slow lines, gathering into the painted pupil. The eye seemed to wet itself, to focus, to look. Valak began a litany of denial. The banner split from top to bottom. A figure stepped out of it. It wore relic armor that had once been white. Now it was the color of old ivory soaked in blood. Its helm was featureless, except for a cracked eye slit, leaking red vapor. Its hands held a blade that had no material consistency, now iron, now bone, now a strip of flayed light. It moved like a memory of an Astartes, rather than a warrior of flesh. Boethius met it first. The possessed guardian crossed the distance with impossible speed. Its blade struck his faceplate and sheared through ceramite, plasteel, and the augmetic housing of his right eye. Sparks and blood burst from the wound. Half his helm tore away. The red lens died, falling in fragments. Beneath it, Boethius's ruined face showed meat, metal, broken cheekbone, and one remaining eye that did not blink. He did not cry out. He did not fall back. He punched the guardian hard enough to crack its breastplate. It slid across the floor, boots carving sparks. Boethius followed in silence, blood pouring down his chin, broken helm grill hanging loose against his jaw. The guardian struck again, blade opening his side. Serevan moved toward him. Boethius raised one hand without looking. No. The veteran drove forward. His power fist caught the guardian by the throat. The thing laughed in a dead legionary voice and stabbed him through the ribs. Boethius headbutted it with the broken side of his helm, once, twice, a third time, each impact scattering blood and ceramite shards. Then Valax Crozius took the guardian in the knee, while Phasas fired 3 bolt rounds into its torso. The guardian exploded inward, not outward, inward, as though swallowed by its own armor. Its breastplate folded, its limbs snapped into the collapsing center, and the red vapor screamed through the helm slit before vanishing. The relic armor clattered empty to the floor. Boethius stood over it, bleeding heavily. Serevan approached despite the earlier refusal. "Your eye is gone." Boethius looked at him with the remaining one. "Then my aim must improve." Serevan sealed the worst of the wound with combat foam. Boethius did not make a sound. Phasas watched the dark ahead. "Can you continue?" Boethius picked up his bolter. I had not stopped. They reached the vault heart after another descent through sealed compliance bunkers and fossilized corpse layers. The walls there were not built from stone alone. They contained bones, thousands of them, perhaps millions, skulls pressed into mortar, hands fused into metal, rib cages flattened beneath pressure and used as reinforcement lattices. The entire foundation was a mass grave disguised as architecture. At its center stood a throne of black iron. Halbrecht Vornus sat upon it. The planetary governor was alive, though no longer entirely himself. His rich robes were torn open. Cables entered his spine, throat, and temples. His chest had been split and held apart by brass clamps, exposing lungs that breathed in the wrong rhythm. His heart was visible, beating too slowly, each pulse answered by the deeper throb of the vault around him. His eyes were black from edge to edge. Behind him, ancient machines rose in tiers, vast and silent, their surfaces marked with lunar wolves' kill codes, pre-imperial sigils, and prayers carved over prayers until language became a wound. Phasas aimed his bolter. Halbrecht Vornus. The governor smiled with another man's mouth. "Small name," he said. "Thin skin, brief blood. I have worn better." Valax stepped forward. "Name the thing speaking." The governor's head twitched. His smile widened until the corners of his mouth split. Blood slid down his chin. "I am the memory they buried. I am the oath they sealed under cathedrals. I am the first compliance and the first refusal. I am every son who knelt to the wolf, and every father who whispered that the wolf would return." Carius moved to the flank. Domitian followed, rifle raised, feeling the walls pulse around them. Phasas said, "The rebellion is ended." The thing in Vornus laughed. The sound came from the throne, the walls, the old machines, and the dead helmets behind them. "Ended? Sons of Dawn, you are children playing at conclusion. The war did not end. The War Master reached into the future and found worlds that would remember him even after his bones were dust. You burned a pistol, you shattered a painting, you shot prisoners who had already won by sleeping beneath your feet. Marden's servo arms clicked open. The structure is active. Destroy it, Phasas said. The governor looked at Valak, then at Domitian, then at Phasas. The black eyes glimmered with something ancient and amused. You came to destroy a relic, sons of Dawn, he said. You are standing inside it. The vault answered Phasas with the voice of closing doors. It did not move like a machine. Machines obeyed cause, command, and failure. The vault moved like a living fortress, remembering that it possessed bones. The walls shuddered first, black iron swelling beneath skins of fossilized mortar and dead men's teeth. Then the floor flexed under the Warbringers' boots, not enough to break their balance, only enough to prove that what held them was awake. Old lumen globes ignited in sequence down the chamber, each one burning the color of infected blood. The throne behind Governor Vornus sank into the platform with a wet hydraulic groan, dragging his split body down into the dark, while his laughter remained in the air. The gate behind the kill team slammed shut. Marden turned at once, servo arms flaring. His mechadendrites plunged into the gate seams before the echoes faded. Sparks spat around him. The gate did not simply lock. It grew shut. Metal folded into metal. Bone struts slid from the walls and fused across the entrance like ribs sealing over a heart. The black surface smoothed itself, erasing the split by which they had entered. "Exit route denied," Marden said. "No," Phasas replied. "Exit route postponed." The words were not comfort. They were command. The chamber screamed. Vents opened in the walls, not with the hiss of pressure release, but with the tearing sound of meat peeled from bone. Iron shutters irised apart. From them came the first murder servitors, crawling on hooked limbs, their human remnants swaddled in rusted plating and old oath parchment. Their skulls had been planed flat to receive bronze lenses. Saw arrays replaced hands. Injector needles sprouted from their spines like quills. Some were fresh, made from the palace dead. Others were ancient, their preserved flesh black and hard as old leather. Their vox grills chanted in broken Chthonian. Behind them came corpse automata, skeletal frames built around dead men sealed in iron reliquaries. Their ribs were exposed through machine cages. Their jawbones clacked around command spikes. Old blood ran from them, though their hearts had not beaten for millennia. They carried bolters of pre-heresy pattern and chain axes, whose teeth were clotted with meat that could not be recent, and yet dripped warm. Then the possessed militia came. They flooded through the openings in torn uniforms, broken carapace, noble dueling coats, minor harness, and priestly rags. Many had already died above. Domitian recognized the wound logic of corpses. A man with no lower jaw crawled forward while chanting. Another ran with his abdomen open, intestines dragging behind him in a glistening rope that caught around his ankles and made him stumble. A third had half his skull missing, brain exposed and pulsing beneath a film of black light. The vault drove them onward. Dead hands gripped rifles. Dead throats praised the War Master. Phasas fired first. His bolter spoke in controlled judgment. Each shell punched into bodies and detonated, shredding ribs, blasting out spines, bursting torsos against the walls. Valak charged into the leftward press, Crozius swinging in arcs of power-lit thunder. Boethius took the center, power fist clenched, storm bolter hammering. Carius vanished into shadow along the chamber's flank, Domitian and Zosimus flowing after him until the scouts became muzzle flashes and knife strikes in the murk. The dead did not stop when ruined. That was the first lesson of the living vault. A militia corpse took a bolt round through the chest and lost everything between throat and pelvis. Its legs kept running. Its arms still fired. Boethius crushed it flat under one boot, the skull bursting last with a sharp crack and a spray of black blood. A murder servitor lost both sore limbs to Domitian's rifle, then leapt by spine flex alone and clamped its teeth onto Zosimus's forearm guard. Zosimus drove a combat blade through its ear and twisted until the bronze lens in its skull popped outward with a clot of rotten nerve fibre. A corpse automaton swung a chain axe into a Warbringer's shoulder, chewing deep through ceramite. The brother answered by putting his bolt pistol under the relic cage where the dead man's head hung. One shot detonated the skull and filled the cage with bone paste. The automaton staggered, but did not fall until Valak's Crozius smashed the spine shrine from its back. The chamber narrowed itself as they fought. Walls slid inward by handspans. Pillars rose where there had been open ground. Murder holes opened in the ceiling and vomited bone darts, brass flechettes, and screaming vox ghosts. The vault was not holding a battlefield. It was becoming one around them, shaping angles, cutting sight lines, turning advance into choke, turning retreat into sacrifice. Phasas understood it instantly. A son of dawn knew walls. He knew siege. He knew that fortresses were not inert constructions, but arguments written in stone and steel. This one had reversed the argument. The Warbringers were inside the enemy's walls, and the walls wished to digest them. "Formation break," he voxed. "Siege inversion protocols. We become the breach." The 5th Company answered with acknowledgement clicks and kill runes. Phasas drove his blade through a corpse automaton's pelvis and kicked the divided thing aside. "Valak, reliquary heart, destroy anything that prays back." "By flame and certainty," the chaplain answered. "Boethius, armory vault, secure or deny all munitions." Boethius tore a possessed militiaman in half with his power fist, shook the top half from his gauntlet and said, "Understood. Carius, signal crypt, silence the broadcast. Moving. Domitian, Zosimus, beacon pattern through the lower ribs, teleport anchors for extraction and reinforcement." Domitian fired through the mouth of a charging corpse, the bolt detonating inside its throat and blowing the back of its head across the wall. "Acknowledged. Marden, with me." The Tech Marine's servo arms impaled 2 murder servitors at once and crushed them together until their bone cages collapsed. The Vault's spirit resists categorization. Categorize it after it dies. The kill team split. The Vault tried to punish the division at once. Shutters slammed down. Floors broke apart into tooth-edged trenches. Pipes burst overhead, dripping promethium in burning threads. The dead came in greater numbers, dragging themselves from vents, from under the floor, from sarcophagus slots, hidden behind the walls. The Warbringers did not run from them. They advanced with the brutal patience of siege masters, trapped inside the fortress they intended to ruin. Valak entered the reliquary passage alone, except for 2 battle brothers who followed at his gesture. The passage was lined with noble dead preserved in glass, each one holding a miniature copy of the false relic. Their eyes opened as he passed, their mouths filled with smoke. One glass coffin shattered, and a nobleman in rotted finery tumbled out onto his knees. His body was swollen by possession, skin stretched so thin that demonic light shone through the veins. "Absolution," the noble begged. The word came from several throats within him. Valak halted. The noble crawled forward, leaving strips of dead skin on the floor. "I was deceived. My fathers were deceived. My blood was pledged before my birth. Mercy, angel. Absolve me." Valak looked down at him. "Confess." The noble's face twisted with hope. "I renounce the War Master. I renounce the Dawn. I renounce the Eye." The demon inside him laughed through his ribs. Valak raised his Crozius. "Accepted." He brought the weapon down into the noble's sternum. The power field split bone, opened the chest, and crushed the heart into pulp against the spine. The possessed body convulsed, hands clawing at the chaplain's greaves. Valak planted one boot on its abdomen and pulled the Crozius free with a wet crack. Then he signaled the flamer brother behind him. Promethium washed over the body. The noble burned. His skin curled. Fat hissed. The demon's voice rose into a shriek. from the open chest, then thinned as the heat took the lungs and boiled the blood. Valak watched until the voice became steam. "Absolved," he said. Far above them, the surface war worsened. The vault's broadcast surged through the old astropathic choir. The blinded children and failed psychers, still wired into the heretic organ, screamed commands they did not understand, their exposed brains pulsing under silver wire as Harusian battle cant rode beneath Imperial hymns. Across the hive continents, rebel units that had been broken by bombardment found new direction. Worker militias rose from ruins and surged toward loyalist lines. Penal battalions charged minefields, laughing with voices not their own. Mutant labor clans poured from refinery pits in endless swarms, their flesh marked with the eye by fresh bleeding wounds that opened without knives. Billions moved, not as soldiers, not all of them, as a tide, as a sacrifice, as pressure. Astra Militarum lines bent under the weight. Skitari cohorts fired until their radium barrels glowed. Night engines stamped entire crowds into pulp, and still the crowds climbed their legs, wedging bodies into joints, detonating mining charges against knee actuators, dragging themselves upward on hooks while their lower halves burned. Artillery turned districts into craters, and the craters filled with more bodies. The Loyalist War became mathematics written in blood, and the numbers were too large for pity to survive. Colonel Hest Vaughan saw the evacuation window appear by accident. A bombardment had collapsed 2 rebel armor routes, but it had opened an underpass beneath District CAF. Civilian signals began flooding through it, thousands at first, then hundreds of thousands, moving beneath smoke and wreckage toward a loyalist trench corridor. They were not all pure. Vaughan knew that. Some would be synod, some would be infected by hymn code, some would be cowards wearing loyalty as a mask, but many had carried the oath code since before the first drop pod fell. Many had held faith while the Warbringers marked their streets for shelling. His orders were clear: no evacuation. The routes were kill corridors. Vaughan stared at the slate until the runes blurred. Then he ordered the corridor opened. His adjutant went pale. "Colonel, Warbringer Command forbade civilian movement through that approach." "I heard the order." "My lord, they will classify obstruction." Vaughan looked out over the trench. His men were exhausted, burned, hollow-eyed, and still human enough to look toward the fleeing masses with something more than calculation. "Then we had better make ourselves difficult to discard," he said. "Open the guns on either flank. Screen the civilians. Any man bearing arms without Imperial clearance dies before he reaches the wire." The convoy began as a trickle and became a flood. Cargo crawlers, medici carts, ashwalkers, wounded men dragged on doors, children carried under coats, factory workers with hands still chained from labor shifts, priests whose faith might be true or might be useful, old soldiers wearing medals from forgotten campaigns. Vaughan's regiment formed a corridor of laser guns and bayonets. They shot those who broke formation. They shot those who displayed synod markings. They shot those who tried to rush the line. They saved the rest, because for one brief hour in the war, a mortal colonel chose disobedience over efficiency. Fazas saw it through a fractured command relay beneath the vault. The rune marked Vaughan's convoy as obstruction. The tactical penalty unfolded across his retinal display. Delayed artillery, compromised kill lane, enemy infiltration risk, civilian mass interfering with redeployment. Valak, distant in the reliquary heart, saw the same data and voxed: permission to censure the colonel by remote strike. "Denied," Fazas said. "He disobeys." His regiment still holds the eastern hinge. His guns remain useful. His men are killing rebels along the corridor. And when usefulness ends, then judgment resumes. Domitian heard the exchange while planting the first teleport beacon in the lower ribs of the vault. He drove the device into a seam of black iron and watched its runes struggle against the surrounding interference. Zosimus crouched nearby, covering the tunnel. They will kill him, Zosimus said, when he is no longer useful. That is our law now, Domitian. Thought of the choir, the informer, the civilians under artillery, the false relic burning, the truth shattered because it did not serve. No, he said, it was always the law. We are only hearing it spoken plainly. Boethius reached the armory vault through a corridor paved with skulls that cracked beneath his boots. The doors were sealed by Lunar Wolves' kill codes and noble bloodlocks. He opened them by killing the things guarding the thresholds until their bodies lay thick enough to hold the doors apart. Inside, ancient munitions waited in black racks, untouched by sanctioned inventory. Shells marked with the wolf. Rad grenades sealed in bone tubes. Stasis weapons forbidden by modern right. Their crystal housings filled with trapped instants that flickered like dying stars. Virus shells lay in a locked shrine, each one black and silver, each one capable of turning life into a chain reaction of rot. Boethius stood before them, half his face still ruined, one eye gone, blood dried along his jaw. Marden, he voxed. Armory secured, contents heretical, utility significant. Marden's answer came through static. Do not disturb the virus shells. Stasis weapons may destabilize under warp memory contamination. Boethius looked at the racks. Then I will deny them. Negative, Phasas cut in. Hold position until assessment. If the vault requires internal destruction, forbidden weapons may become useful. There it was again, hanging unspoken beneath the order. Were they saving Vulscus Secundus, or preserving its value? A clean world might have been burned from orbit. A useless world might have been cracked open and left to freeze. Vulscus had Prometheum oceans, manufactoria, tithes, manpower, fuel arteries the Imperium needed to keep other wars alive. The Warbringers were not here to spare the innocent. They were not even here to spare the truth. They were here to return a resource to obedience and prevent a deeper corruption from spreading. Salvation, if it existed at all, wore the mask of production quotas and acceptable loss. The vault knew it. It laughed through the walls. Phasas and Marden reached the central logic spine after cutting through 3 sealed choke points and a corridor where dead rebels crawled without limbs, biting at greaves until their skulls were crushed. Marden impaled the spine with every data spike he possessed. His body convulsed as the vault's machine code fought him through the connection. Servo arms gouged the floor. Red warning runes flashed across his armor. Speak, Phasas ordered. Marden's voice emerged layered with static, binharic shrieks and something that sounded like a distant wolf howl. The vault is not powered by reactor alone. It is anchored into the planetary fuel mantle. Prometheum pressure beneath the capital hive feeds its thermal arteries. Warp memory rides the heat exchange. Every death above amplifies command resonance. Every hymn through the choir increases cohesion. Can it be severed? Yes. Phasas waited. Marden's helm turned slowly toward him. Not by blade, not by lance from orbit, not while the hive stands intact above the mantle locks. Valak's channel opened, full of flame roar and dying voices. Name the method. Marden's servo arms stilled. To kill the vault, the tech marine said, we must ignite the planet's primary Prometheum mantle beneath the capital hive. Phasas authorized the end of the capital hive with the same tone he had used to order ammunition tallies. No tremor entered his voice. No pause marked the weight of the decision. He stood in the living vault's central logic spine, with Prometheum vapor bleeding from the walls and the pulse of the buried horror beating through the soles of his boots, and he looked upon the tactical projection Marden had torn from the vault's resisting machine soul. It flickered in red and gold between them, a diseased image of the capital hive, its foundations, its fuel mantle, its pressure locks, its old Lunar Wolves kill codes, its thermal arteries feeding the thing beneath the world. Above that projection were lives beyond counting. Rebels, loyalists, prisoners, cowards, faithful workers, hidden cultists, unarmed pilgrims, wounded guardsmen, mutant labor clans, children of the Manufactoria, priests who had lied, priests who had believed the lie, men praying to the Emperor while standing upon the engine of the War Master's memory, men too ignorant to know that their bones had already been entered into the arithmetic of salvation. Below them was the vault. It was awakening faster now. The walls throbbed with each pulse. The floor exhaled heat. Dead mouths whispered through vox grills and empty helmets. Somewhere in the dark, the governor thing laughed inside 1,000 buried pipes. Marden's servo arms remained buried in the logic spine. Sparks crawled along his red plate. His voice came through layers of machine pain. Pressure seals beneath the capital are locked to the vault's thermal cycle. If breached in sequence, the promethium mantle will ignite beneath the hive and burn inward, not outward. Containment is possible for a limited duration if the orbital batteries maintain atmospheric compression strikes and if the surface vents are sealed before full cascade. Casualty projection, Fazas said. Marden did not hesitate. Total within the capital foundations and lower districts, severe through the middle hive. Survivability in upper spires depends on structural collapse. Loyalist forces in the eastern corridor will be exposed to secondary ignition. Civilian concentrations remain present in multiple marked zones. Operational consequence. The vault dies. That was enough. Fazas opened the command channel to the Deathmonger, to the surface batteries, to the surviving Warbringers strike elements, to the Skitari command rights, to the Astra Militarum artillery net, to the Navy wings drowning in flame above the hive. Execute mantle ignition protocol. Controlled burn. All marked pressure locks are to be breached in sequence. Orbital batteries will compress the firestorm. Drop reserves will secure the vents. No evacuation priority supersedes the kill order. For a moment, the Vox carried nothing but static and distant screaming. Then Valak's voice entered the channel, rich with flame, battle, and certainty. The Emperor asks not whether the pyre screams. He asks whether it burns clean. The words passed through the war like a benediction and a death warrant. Domitian heard them while crawling through the lower ribs of the vault, with the final teleport beacon mag locked to his chest. The tunnel around him was not stone now. It had become something between architecture and anatomy, black iron layered with bone, cables pulsing like veins beneath plates of old armor, seams dripping hot promethium in amber strings. Zosimus was behind him, firing measured bursts down the passage at dead men that would not remain dead. Carius moved ahead, a shadow with a rifle, marking the safest path through a fortress that kept changing its mind. The order reached all of them. Mantle ignition. Total within the capital foundations and lower districts. Domitian froze for half a breath. He saw the choir, the eyeless children wired into the Vox organ. He saw the informer in the press yard, looking up through blood where no mortal eye should have found him. He saw the civilian signals blinking on the tactical overlay when the artillery fell. He saw refugees beneath District CAF moving through smoke while Colonel Vaughan's men opened a corridor against orders. He saw men who were loyal, not pure, not innocent in the childish sense. No citizen of the Imperium was innocent. All were born into debt. All died owing more, but loyal, uncorrupted, still praying to the throne while the sons of the throne prepared to burn them beneath their own hive. "There are Imperial citizens below," Domitian said. Carius did not turn. "There are enemies below. There are citizens. There is a vault below. Some are uncorrupted. Then they will die uncorrupted." Zosimus fired again. A corpse without legs dragged itself around the bend, teeth clacking, fingers tearing at the floor. A bolt round took it in the skull and burst it into black paste. Domitian's voice hardened. "That is your answer?" Carius stopped then. He looked back through the dark helm lenses, cold and unreadable. "My answer is that the galaxy does not pause because you have discovered the cost of obedience. The Emperor's realm stands upon graves deeper than this vault. Every wall is mortared with men who deserved more and received duty. You think recognition changes the equation. It does not. They believed we came to save them. We came to save the Imperium. Domitian held his gaze. Carrius stepped closer. You want softness named mercy. You want hesitation named conscience. You want the dead to approve of the manner of their dying. These are mortal luxuries. We are not mortals. No, Domitian said. We are worse. The words hung between them. Zosimus said nothing. Carrius did not strike Domitian. He did not rebuke him with anger. That would have been easier. Instead, he said, "Then be worse with discipline. Plant the beacon." Above them, the war rose into godhood. Orbital batteries punched holes through the cloud layers. Macro shells descended from the Deathmonger, and the captured bastions like meteors chained to Imperial will. Lance beams burned vertical wounds through the storm cover, each strike boiling clouds into white rings before touching ground and turning defense towers into pillars of molten glass. The sky over Vulscus Secundus ceased to resemble weather. It became a weapon system. Titans fired into hive walls. The god engines strode through ash and corpse fog, their void shields rippling under rebel bombardment, their war horns shaking blood from the ears of men kilometers away. A warlord engine raised its volcano cannon toward the capital's western curtain wall and fired. The beam struck armorcrete thick enough to bury cities and made it liquid. Entire regiments standing along the wall vanished in the glare. Their shadows remained for a moment on the stone behind them, then the stone sloughed away in glowing sheets. Aircraft fell by the thousands. Imperial Navy craft and rebel interceptors tangled in skies filled with flak, ash, burning promethium vapor, and debris from orbital strikes. Some died instantly, their fuel cells blossoming into brief suns. Others came down screaming through the hive canyons, wings torn off, pilots trapped in cockpits, ammunition cooking inside fuselages. One burning gunship struck an evacuation bridge and cartwheeled through the panicked mass crossing it. Bodies flew like ragged dolls. The bridge buckled, then collapsed, pouring thousands into the fires below. Their screams vanished into the roar before they struck the lower levels. Trench armies disappeared under waves of shrapnel. Shell storms walked across the eastern approaches, each detonation lifting men, mud, bones, sandbags, gun wheels, and torn banners into the air. Penal battalions charging beneath Synod commands were shredded so completely that their explosive collars detonated after their heads were already gone. Mutant labor clans burst apart under rad fire from Skitari lines, their swollen organs slapping wetly against trench walls. Loyalist guardsmen died beside them when rebel counter-barrages landed short, or Imperial batteries corrected too late. The war no longer distinguished courage from treachery at range. It consumed both and allowed officers to name the result. Then the Warbringers' reserve struck. Every key site identified across weeks of reconnaissance received them at once. Drop pods screamed down into vent districts, signal shrines, fuel locks, pressure towers, bridge controls, ammunition depots, noble panic vaults, choir junctions, and hidden tunnels. It was not a second invasion. It was the closing of a fist. The Warbringers had waited, watched, mapped, and endured while the world lied beneath them. Now every silence became impact. A pod crashed through the roof of a pressure cathedral and opened among chanting engineers. Its doors blew outward, crushing men against brass machinery. Warbringers emerged through steam and devotional smoke, firing into the control pits. Another pod landed on a bridge tower, moments before rebel sappers detonated the span, killing them under its descent and leaving the tower intact long enough for Tech Marine thralls to seize the controls. A third hit a noble evacuation platform, flattening a shuttle, its pilot crew, and 3 generations of House Kelvar under one iron coffin. When the pod opened, the squad within killed the survivors by gene scan priority. At the eastern corridor, Colonel Hest Vaughan stood on a firing step and watched hell arrive. The evacuation route he had opened was breaking. It had saved hundreds of thousands. It had also drawn millions. Refugees choked the underpass, the trench road, the cargo ramps, the shattered Hab Bridge, every approach and drain mouth that led toward his lines. His men had shot infiltrators until their last barrels smoked. They had shot panic. They had shot infected. They had dragged children from under vehicles and bayoneted men whose tongues hid the synod mark. They had held longer than any calculation had allowed. Now the Prometheum rivers were igniting behind them. A refinery artery ruptured beneath District Caf and sent burning fuel through the avenue like a living thing. It rolled over stalled cargo crawlers, swallowed the wounded, climbed barricades, and poured into shelters where men had thought stone could save them. Those caught at the edge did not simply burn. Their clothes flashed away, their skin blistered and split. Fat ran from them in shining streams, and some kept running for several steps as blackened skeletons wearing fire. Rebel columns caught in the streets beyond melted into fused silhouettes against ferrocrete walls, bodies pressed there by heat and blast, outlines forever locked in poses of flight. Vaughan's Vox officer shouted, "Warbringer command on priority channel." Vaughan seized the handset. "This is Vaughan." Fazers answered from beneath the world, his voice flattened by interference. "You disobeyed." Vaughan looked at the corridor. Men shoved refugees forward. Medici orderlies amputated crushed limbs without anesthetic because there was no time. A child carrying an oath token tripped over a dead commissar and disappeared beneath boots before a guardsman dragged him up by the collar. "Yes," Vaughan said, "you obstructed a kill route. I saved Imperial citizens. You also allowed infected elements into your line. We killed them. Not all." Vaughan laughed once. It sounded like something breaking. "Then send one of your angels to count them while we burn." Static snarled. "Your corridor is now required," Fazers said. "Hold it." Vaughan looked beyond the refugees, toward the red glow building under the hive. The mantle ignition had begun. The lower world was becoming a furnace. Every instinct told him to pull back, seal the trench, leave the civilians, save the guns. Every order he had ever obeyed told him the same. How long? Until the vault dies. That is not a duration. It is the only one you have. Vaughan closed his eyes. Around him, the air tasted of ash and cooked meat. He had served the Imperium all his life. He had seen worlds taken, worlds lost, worlds shelled into obedience. He had met commissars with softer eyes than the space marines below. He had prayed for the Emperor's angels as a child. Now one ordered him to turn his regiment into a doorstop against damnation. "You are monsters," Vaughan said. "Yes," Fazers replied. "Hold the corridor." Vaughan opened his eyes. He looked at the men waiting for him to give them permission to live or die. First and second batteries, fire until the barrels split. Third company, form blocking ranks behind the refugees. Heavy weapons to the flanks. Any rebel mass reaching the wire dies. Any civilian crossing armed dies. Any man who runs before I order it will answer to me before the Emperor gets him. His adjutant stared at him. "Colonel, we cannot hold." Vaughan drew his chainsword. Its teeth stuttered, caught, then roared alive. "I heard the angel," he said. "We hold anyway." Beneath the hive, Domitian reached the final beacon point. The chamber was narrow, almost intimate after the vastness of the vault, a ribbed hollow of black iron and pale bone, overlooking a shaft that dropped into red darkness. Heat rose from below in waves strong enough to make his armor warnings flicker. The beacon in his hands trembled as the vault's interference gnawed at its signal. Zosimus covered the passage behind him. Carius had moved ahead to clear the signal crypt, leaving Domitian alone with the shaft, the device, and the sound of the planet beginning to burn from underneath. He drove the beacon spike into the marked seam. It resisted. He struck it again with the heel of his palm, The spike bit deeper. Runes flickered amber. Not active. Not yet. A voice spoke behind him. "You are learning." Domitian turned, rifle rising. Governor Halbrecht Vornus stood where there had been no one a moment before. Not flesh, not entirely. His body remained split and wired, robes hanging in burned ribbons, chest open around the wrong slow heart. But he cast no proper shadow. His face shifted between the governor's features and older men wearing older wounds. His black eyes reflected fires that were not in the chamber. Domitian fired. The bolt passed through him and detonated against the far wall, showering the chamber with bone chips. The governor thing smiled. "I am not where you aim, little son of Dawn's sons." Domitian keyed the beacon again. The rune flickered, failed, flickered. The thing drifted closer. "They will burn them all. Those you saw, those you pitied, those you pretended not to pity. Your sergeant told you to be worse with discipline. Is that what they carved you to become?" Domitian slammed his fist against the beacon housing. "Amber, amber, red." The thing's voice softened. "I can give you truth." Domitian kept his bolter trained on it, though his sight knew the gesture was useless. "Truth," the thing said again. "Not Valak's useful lie, not Pharsas's arithmetic, not the corpse emperor's demand that mankind survive by becoming a weapon aimed at itself. Truth. The Imperium was born in massacre and named it compliance. The War Master learned from his father. Your chapter preserves false histories and burns the evidence. Your mercy is forbidden, because mercy would prove the cruelty was chosen." The chamber trembled. Prometheum thunder rolled upward from below. "Plant the beacon," Carius voxed, distant through static. Domitian reached for the activation rune. The governor thing raised one hand. Pain lanced through Domitian's skull. Not physical. Memory. Not his own. A compliance field under a young sun. White-armored warriors descending under Imperial banners. Men kneeling. Men shot after kneeling. A bolt pistol raised above a corpse and later called holy. Records rewritten. Priests teaching children a lie. Generations praying to a weapon of the future damned. Warbringers coming at last, not to reveal the truth, but to bury it deeper under ash. The thing stood before him, close enough now that Domitian could smell old blood and cold stars. "I can give you pity," it whispered. "I can give you freedom from obedience. No more watching men die because another voice named it necessary. No more calling calculation virtue. No more pretending the screams do not enter you." Domitian's hand hovered over the rune. The thing smiled wider. "Be more than their weapon." Domitian looked into the black eyes. Then he thought of Carius's lesson, of Pharsas's cold certainty, of Valak's terrible faith, of Vaughn cursing monsters and holding the corridor anyway, of the dead informer who had looked up and received nothing except the knowledge that judgment was coming. "I am their weapon," Domitian said. He activated the beacon. White light tore the chamber open. The governor thing was still speaking when the teleport strike arrived. Lightning cracked through the vault heart. Air became thunder. Reality bent around the beacon's signal and broke. The first company materialized in a ring of stormlight, Terminator plate and drawn weapons arriving inside the living heart of the vault. Boethius stood at their head, one eye gone, the other burning red with reflected fire. "Target acquired," he said. The teleport flare died, and the heart of the vault revealed itself. It was not a chamber in any sane meaning of the word. It was a cathedral turned inward, a temple built for a god that had never deserved worship, and a machine that had learned to dream in blood. Pillars of bronze rose like ribs into darkness. Chains thicker than tank hulls hung from the unseen roof, each one threaded through stasis crystals that glowed with trapped moments from wars 10,000 years dead. Faces moved inside those crystals, screaming soundlessly, dying and undying in the same eternal instant. The floor pulsed underfoot with a slow, wet rhythm. At the center, beneath a throne of black iron, the vault heart beat. It was vast, cathedral-sized, a swollen engine of flesh, bronze, crystal, cable, bone, oath parchment, and living memory. Veins as thick as fuel conduits ran from it into the walls. Armor plates from ancient Legion war gear had been fused into its surface like scales. Human skulls were set into its flesh in patterns that hurt the eye, each skull drilled open and filled with black wax. The thing beat without lungs, without right, without permission. Every pulse shook dust from the ceiling and sent waves of heat through the chamber. Domitian stood at the edge of the teleport circle, with smoke curling from his armor, his rifle raised but momentarily. Forgotten. He had seen battlefield horrors. He had crawled through corpse vats, watched loyal men fed into refinery gears, seen hab blocks fold inward under artillery, and pilgrims burn around the lie they had worshipped. This was worse, because it did not merely kill. It remembered. It made every death on Vulskus part of itself. Every prayer, every shell burst, every loyal scream, every traitor oath, all of it moved in the heart, like blood through a diseased organ. Boethius and the First Company opened fire. Storm bolters roared in the vault heart, and for a moment the chamber became pure thunder. Mass reactive shells slammed into possessed relic guardians, advancing from the bronze shadows. They wore fragments of ancient legionary armor. Some bore white plates with wolf marks scratched beneath later corruption. Some wore helms split down the center and sealed with black wax. Some had no bodies inside their war plate, only smoke, bone dust, and hatred given shape. Others still had flesh, mummified or swollen, eyes burning behind cracked lenses. The first guardian took 6 bolt shells to the chest and kept walking, armor cratering inward, black blood spraying from joints. Boethius met it with his power fist and drove it against a bronze pillar. Its torso burst between fist and metal, spilling ribs, dust, and a mass of pale worms that hissed as they died. Another guardian swung a chain blade grown from its own forearm, teeth made of finger bones. It caught a Warbringer across the waist and opened him from hip to spine. Apothecary Serevan marked the wound in a blink, already knowing the warrior would die before he fell. Phasas entered through the storm of fire with Valak at his side. The captain moved as if the heart were a fortress gate, and he had already decided where the hinges lay. His bolter fired in measured bursts. His power sword lit at last, its blade becoming a blue-white line in the red gloom. Valak advanced beside him, Crozius raised, skull helm reflecting the wet pulse of the impossible engine. Around them, surviving Warbringers formed a wedge, not shouting, not exulting, only killing. The governor thing stood upon the black throne above the heart. Halbrecht Vornus was almost gone. His mortal body had stretched, split, and hollowed around whatever memory wore him. His ribs had opened like a cage. His spine was no longer a single column, but a bundle of cables descending into the throne. His face changed with every pulse. Governor, noble ancestor, great crusade rebel, dead priest, young soldier kneeling under white armored conquerors, old man whispering the War Master's name into a child's ear. It looked down at the Warbringers and smiled with too many mouths. "You see it now," it said. "The thing your Imperium fears most is not my master. It is remembrance." Phasas cut down a guardian that wore a shattered lunar wolf's pauldron. The sword passed through the neck seal, and the head came free in a spray of black vapor. The governor thing continued. Its voice filled the heart chamber from every direction. "Your empire survives by burial. It buries the fathers who became traitors. It buries the worlds conquered by monsters and renamed by saints. It buries the compliance fields, the butchered cities, the prayers spoken to relics of the damned. False saints, false histories, false mercy. You are built on rewritten truths, sons of dawn. You are built on erased compliances and necessary lies." Valak stopped beneath the throne. A relic guardian struck at him from the side. He crushed its knee with his Crozius, seized the helm with one hand and drove the weapon down through its skull until the helmet split and grey matter mixed with smoke spilled across his gauntlet. He looked up at the governor thing as the corpse fell. Then we shall preserve the useful lies and burn the useless ones. The governor thing laughed. The vault heart beat faster. Every vent in the chamber opened at once. Warp-twisted militia poured in, hundreds of them, then more behind them, bodies twisted by the vault's memory and the mantle fire rising below. They had been rebels, prisoners, loyalists, pilgrims, workers, soldiers, perhaps all of those things. Now they came as a flood of torn uniforms, burned faces, broken weapons, and mouths stretched wide by voices that were not their own. Some crawled with their legs missing. Some ran while their skins sloughed from them in sheets. Some carried lasguns fused into their hands. Some had black iron nails driven through their eyes and still saw well enough to charge. They came through a breach in the left wall, straight toward the flank that protected Phasis' path to the heart. Boethius saw the breach. He moved before the order could be spoken. The veteran placed himself in the gap and became a wall. The militia struck him like surf against a cliff. He fired until his storm bolter clicked empty, each shell tearing men apart at arm's length. Bodies burst against him, ribs opening, skulls cracking, blood washing over his ruined faceplate. When the weapon ran dry, he used it as a club and crushed the first rank into the second. A chain axe bit into his thigh. He snapped the wielder's neck with a backhand. A grenade detonated against his chest, cracking the already battered plate and driving him back half a step. Only half. Phasis, he voxed, calm beneath the roar. Proceed. The captain did not waste the gift by answering with sentiment. He advanced. Domitian saw Carius fall near the rightward signal spur. The scout sergeant had been covering Zosimus while the latter planted a secondary anchor. A relic guardian struck from the ceiling, dropping like a piece of falling night, and drove a barbed blade through Carius's shoulder, pinning him to the floor. Carius's rifle skidded away. The guardian bent over him, helm split open, revealing a skull bound in black wire. It whispered in Chthonian as it raised a second blade for the kill. Domitian moved. He did not think of mercy. He did not think of the informer, the choir, or the colonel holding the corridor above. He moved because Carius was a command asset, because the signal spur remained required, because discipline demanded no weapon be abandoned while it could still kill for the operation. That was what he told himself. His rifle fired twice. The first round shattered the guardian's wrist. The second struck the skull behind the helm and burst it outward in a spray of wire, bone, and black flame. The thing collapsed over Carius. Domitian was already there, heaving the corpse aside. The sergeant's shoulder armor was pierced through, blood pumping dark around the blade. Carius looked up at him. "Beacon," he said. "Zosimus has it." "Then why are you here?" Domitian seized the barbed blade and pulled it free. Ceramite screamed. Carius did not. The wound sprayed blood across Domitian's greaves. "Discipline," Domitian said. For a moment, even in the heart of the vault, even beneath the thunder of Boethius dying by degrees and Phasis cutting toward the impossible heart, Carius seemed to understand the lie and the truth inside the word. "Then spend it well," he said. They rose together. Boethius was still holding. His armor had become a ruin. The left side of his torso plate was cracked open, showing meat, reinforced bone, and torn black carapace beneath. One arm hung damaged, power fist spasming as its field flickered. A militia brute with 3 mouths drove a mining drill through his abdomen. Boethius gripped the drill housing, pulled himself closer along the bit that was inside him, and crushed the brute's head against the wall with his helm. Another corpse climbed onto his back and bit at the broken faceplate. He reached up, tore it free, and threw it into the mob hard enough to break several men beneath it. The breach kept vomiting bodies. Boethius took one step forward, then another. He pushed the tide back into the opening, not by strength alone, but by refusal. Dawn's blood did not yield. The Warbringers did not yield. The veteran did not yield, even when a hooked blade opened his throat seal and blood poured black down his chest. He fired a wrist-mounted weapon until it overheated and fused. He stamped skulls until the floor became slick fragments. He killed with fist, boot, shoulder, teeth, broken armor edges, and the sheer weight of his dying body. Boethius, Serevan voxed, withdraw 2 paces. No, your progenoids must be recovered. Then come take them. The apothecary went into the storm. Serevan moved like a white blade through red ruin. His narthecium unfolded, saws and drills snapping into position. He fired his bolt pistol into faces, kicked aside crawling dead, and reached Boethius as the veteran finally dropped to one knee. The wound that should have killed him had multiplied into dozens. His armor was split, punctured, burned, and slick with gore. His remaining eye still burned with awareness. "Duty," Serevan said. Boethius grabbed a militia corpse by the throat and used it to block a last burst meant for the apothecary. "Do it." Serevan opened him under fire. The narthecium drill punched through broken plate and into the veteran's torso. Sacred blades moved with brutal speed. Serevan extracted the first progenoid gland as bolt rounds and lasfire cracked around him. Blood washed over his white gauntlets. He sealed the gland in a stasis vial at his waist, then drove the drill higher for the second. Boethius sagged, then forced himself upright again, holding the breach with one arm and half a body, while his lineage was harvested from him. A possessed militiaman lunged at Serevan. Domitian shot it through the spine. Carius put a round through its head as it fell. Serevan withdrew the second gland. "Recovered," he said. Boethius heard. He turned his ruined face toward the heart, toward Phases, toward the chapter. He would continue serving in flesh, no longer his own. "Proceed," he said again. Then the breach swallowed him. The militia tide crashed over his body. For several seconds, it continued to die around him. Fists rose, armor cracked, bodies flew backward. Then the movement ceased, and the mound over him grew. Phases reached the heart. Marden had given him the charges, sacred melter devices prepared with relic burn protocols, and machine curses strong enough to make the vault's bronze nerves recoil. The captain moved beneath whipping cables and bleeding pipes. A relic guardian barred his path, wearing a helm marked with both wolf and eye. Phases cut its arms away, stepped inside its guard, and drove his sword through its chest. He left the blade there, pinning the thing to the heart's outer casing, and fixed the first melter charge by hand. The heart screamed, not through sound alone. It screamed through memory. Domitian saw fire from orbit. Valak saw false saints burning. Phases saw nothing that changed his hand. He placed the second charge, then the third. Marden's servo skulls, or what remained of them, floated near and spat sacred oils onto the devices. Runes turned from red to white. Valak stood before the throne, Crozius planted, and began the chapter's creed. What serves the god emperor is just. The heart beat faster. What harms his imperium is false. The governor thing writhed above them, laughing and shrieking through broken mouths. What is false shall be revealed. Phases armed the charges. What is revealed shall be judged. The vault heart split, showing inner flesh and stasis crystal, faces inside the crystal screaming from old centuries. What is judged shall be purged. Valak raised his Crozius as the dying machine screamed louder than the war above. By flame, by sword, by war. Phases stepped back. The melter charges fired inward. White heat consumed the heart from within. Flesh became steam. Bronze ran like wax. Stasis crystals burst, releasing trapped death cries all at once. The black throne cracked down the center. The governor thing arched backward, its body stretching until cables tore from its spine and its open chest sprayed fire instead of blood. Above them, the capital hive began to collapse into the Promethean mantle. The controlled firestorm became visible from orbit as a continent-wide wound. Streets opened and vomited flame. Foundations melted. Hive districts folded downward in enormous slabs, taking millions of bodies with them. Evacuation bridges snapped under panicked masses. Cathedrals toppled into burning clouds. The mantle ignited beneath the capital and drew the lower hive into itself, a city falling into the throat of the world. From the Deathmonger, it looked like a false sunrise blooming through smoke. Beneath it, the vault died laughing. The Governor Thing's face burned away, revealing something behind it that had never been human. Its laughter followed the Warbringers through collapsing vox channels, through cracking stone, through the fire consuming the heart. "You saved them," it said as it burned. "You saved your Imperium." Phasas watched the throne collapse. "You mistake survival for salvation." The demon laughed harder, even as the melter fire ate its voice. "No, Son of Dawn, you do." The heart ruptured. The chamber became light, heat, and falling iron. And in that last moment before extraction, before the teleport beacons tore the surviving Warbringers from the dying vault, Domitian understood the final cruelty. They had won. They had saved the Imperium by committing an atrocity that must now be hidden. Vulscus Secundus still burned after the war ended. The flames did not know that victory had been declared. They did not know that the True Dawn Synod had been broken, that its confessors had been hanged from refinery cranes, that its noble bloodlines had been dragged from vaults and ended by gene scan, that its hidden shrines had been opened to Promethium and Blade. The flames did not know that the vault beneath the capital had died screaming, or that the capital itself no longer existed, except as a glowing wound visible from low orbit. The world burned because the world had been made to burn. The capital hive was gone. Where it had stood, there was now a basin of molten foundations, collapsed spires, drowned cathedrals, and cooling seas of black glass. The Promethium mantle still fed slow fires beneath the crust, venting through cracks large enough to swallow armored columns. Ash fell across the hemisphere in grey storms. Entire districts that had survived the first days of war now died under poison rain, structural failure, famine, and the quiet efficiency of Imperial quarantine. The surviving hive continents continued to produce, but weakly. Refineries coughed, manufactoria limped, fuel arteries ran at a fraction of required tithe. Billions were dead. More would die before the Administratum found a number acceptable enough to call recovery. The rebellion was annihilated. That was the word entered into the first operational slate aboard the Deathmonger. Not defeated, annihilated. The Emperor's Warbringers did not celebrate it. No feast was held in the Strategium. No songs rose from the arming chapels. No warrior struck his breastplate in triumph before the chapter banners. The Fifth Company moved through aftermath with the same cold order it had brought to descent. Battle brothers knelt in armorium shrines, while serfs scraped blood and carbon from their plate. Tech Marines questioned damaged machine spirits and marked unrecoverable systems for ritual dismantling. Apothecaries sealed progenoid vaults and entered the names of the dead into the chapter's silent record. Servo skulls drifted through corridors, carrying data ribbons that listed ammunition expenditure, armor damage, casualty ratios, fuel loss, confirmed rebel dead, probable rebel dead, civilian dead, loyalist dead, missing, contaminated, quarantined, and useful survivors. The numbers were large enough to become meaningless to mortal minds. They were not meaningless to the Warbringers. Every shell had a place in the ledger. Every drop pod impact had a consequence. Every gene seed recovery was weighed against every brother lost. Every scout casualty, every damaged dreadnought sarcophagus, every expended melter charge, every collapsed fuel artery, every burned hab district, every kilometer of manufactorum rendered temporarily non-functional, all of it mattered because all of it described the shape of victory. Victory was not glory. Victory was a wound that continued to bleed in the correct direction. Captain Faza stood in the strategium before the hololithic ruin of Vulscus Secundus. The projection was no longer a clean tactical sphere. It flickered with damage, atmospheric interference, fire patterns, quarantine zones, production estimates, and orbital surveillance ghosts. The capital zone was marked black, not red. Red meant enemy concentration. Black meant denied, sterilized, or no longer relevant to command, except as warning. Chaplain Valak stood to his right, armor blackened from the vault heart, Crozius still carrying a smear of vitrified matter that had resisted the first rites of cleaning. Tech Marine Marden stood at the command table, servo arms folded, half his mechadendrites replaced by temporary clamps after the vault's logic spine had bitten back through the noosphere. Apothecary Serevan waited with 2 stasis vials mounted in a reliquary case at his chest. They held what remained, in duty, of veteran Boethius. Scout Sergeant Carius stood behind them with one arm sealed in a field brace, his shoulder wound, packed and sutured beneath ceramite. Domitian stood beside him, silent, armor still scarred from the vault and stained where Carius's blood had run over his gauntlets. Interrogator Malrek was also present. He had not slept since the cathedral burned. His stormcoat was torn, his face hollow, one eye red from burst vessels after exposure to the astropathic scream. His rosette remained hidden, though everyone in the chamber knew what he served. He stood alone among transhuman giants and looked less afraid than he should have been. That was either courage or the early stage of fatal misjudgment. The astropathic choir aboard the Deathmonger screamed once. The sound came muted through layers of sanctified shielding. Several mortal crewmen bowed their heads and made the sign of the Aquila. Vases did not turn. Valak did not pray. Serevan watched Malrek to see whether the human flinched. The hololith darkened. A new figure formed above the table in blue-white distortion. Chapter Master Reynold Hoare appeared as a cold ghost of light, immense even through transmission degradation. His armor was not fully rendered by the astropathic relay, but the outline of it carried authority like a fortress wall carries weight. His face was severe, aged by command rather than weakness. He did not appear as a savior arriving after triumph. He appeared as judgment continuing its work from a greater distance. "Captain Phasas," the chapter master said. "My lord." The lie. Contained. The relic. Destroyed by Chaplain Valak in the Cathedral of the First Compliance. The object bore the eye beneath devotional corrosion. No recoverable fragment remains. The deeper structure. Erased. The vault beneath the capital hive was a pre-Imperial and early compliance construct, later corrupted by Harutian memory code, ancestral possession, and embedded warp resonance. It is dead. Hoare's eyes moved to the hololithic black mark where the capital had been. The cost. Billions of planetary subjects, capital hive erased, Prometheum mantle ignited in controlled cascade, production crippled but recoverable within projected administratum tolerance if labor replacement is granted within 3 tithe cycles. Essential refinery oceans remain viable. Secondary hives stand. Orbital defense infrastructure degraded but not lost. Can the world still serve? Yes, my lord. Only then did the chapter master's expression shift, not into approval, merely into acceptance that the necessary fact had been spoken. The Synod. Exterminated as an organized force, remnant cult contamination remains probable in refugee bodies, priestly archives, and underhive populations. Purge detachments continue. The inquisitorial witness. Phasas turned his helm slightly toward Malrek. The interrogator's jaw tightened. Compromised, Phasas said. Alive, useful, under observation. Hoare looked at the mortal projection, and for a moment the strategium seemed to narrow around Malrek. You witnessed? The chapter master asked. Malrek's throat moved. I witnessed enough. That was not my question. The mortal's hand closed around the chain of his data slate. I witnessed the destruction of the false relic, the purgation of the corrupted cathedral, and the termination of the vault entity beneath the capital. And you will record? Malrek said nothing. Valak moved then, one step only, Crozius' head striking the deck with a soft metallic sound. Malrek looked at the chaplain, then at Phasus, then back to the hololithic image of Reynold Hoare. He understood the geometry of the chamber. He understood that truth, once again, was not what had happened. Truth was what would be permitted to endure. I will record, he said, that the rebellion on Vulscus Secundus was caused by Xenos-backed sedition exploiting local doctrinal weakness. I will record that the Cathedral of the First Compliance was destroyed by rebel sabotage during Imperial counter-assault. I will record that the Emperor's Warbringers contained the insurrection, preserved essential tithe infrastructure, and saved the world from total collapse. Valak's skull helm tilted. You will record that the Warbringers saved the world. Malrek's mouth tightened around the words. I will record that the Warbringers saved the world. The chaptermaster studied him for several seconds longer. See that your record serves mankind, Hoare said. Accuracy is valuable. Survival is sacred. The transmission shifted back to Phases. The guard commander. Colonel Hest Vaughan disobeyed direct operational restriction and opened an evacuation corridor through an active kill route. His action preserved hundreds of thousands of potentially loyal citizens and compromised artillery timing. His regiment subsequently held the eastern hinge until mantle ignition completed. Status: alive, in custody. Judgment: pending chaplaincy censure. Hoare's image gave the smallest nod. Proceed. The hololith died. The strategium returned to the red glow of damage runes and the soft chanting of data servitors. Colonel Hest Vaughan was executed without an audience. They brought him to a maintenance chapel beneath the 7th launch deck, where no banners hung and no regimental witnesses were permitted. The chapel smelled of machine oil, incense, and cooling metal. Its altar was a block of black iron bolted to the deck. A single lumen globe burned above it, swinging gently with the tremor of the ship's engines. Vaughan stood without shackles. His coat was burned through in several places. One sleeve was gone. His face was bandaged from brow to jaw, and dried blood had stiffened the collar of his uniform. He looked older than he had in the trench, but not smaller. Valak stood before him in full armor. Phases was present. So was Malrek, though the interrogator remained near the door and said nothing. You held the corridor, Phases said. Vaughan gave a tired laugh. Your praise comes late. It is not praise. No, I suppose not. Valak opened a data slate and read from it. Colonel Hest Vaughan, you disobeyed a direct operational command issued by the Adeptus Astartes under active planetary purgation. Your action obstructed designated kill geometry, exposed loyalist forces to infection risk, and compromised artillery timing during mantle ignition. I saved Imperial citizens. You preserved biological assets of uncertain purity. Vaughan spat blood onto the deck. Call them that if it helps you sleep in your sarcophagi. Phases watched him. Your regiment will receive honors for holding the eastern hinge. Their dead will be entered as martyrs of the Vulscus compliance restoration. Your name will be attached to the citation. Vaughan's eyes narrowed. Posthumously. Yes. And the disobedience? Removed from public record. The colonel looked from Phases to Valak. He understood then, and he smiled with cracked lips. So I die a hero, because morale requires it. Valak raised his bolt pistol. You die disciplined, because obedience requires it. Vaughan stood straighter. You are monsters. Phases answered as he had before. Yes. The colonel closed his eyes. He did not kneel. Then may the Emperor spend you as harshly as you spend us. Valak fired once. The bolt round struck Vaughan in the chest and detonated within him. His back burst outward across the iron altar, ribs, blood, and fragments of uniform slapping wetly against the metal. His body collapsed in a steaming ruin at the chaplain's feet. Valak holstered the pistol. Censure complete. The regiment received its honors before the next shipboard dawn cycle. On Vulscus Secundus, exhausted guardsmen listened through crackling vox horns as the name of Colonel Hest Vaughan was spoken among the righteous dead. Men wept, men cheered, men raised laser guns over trenches still slick with the remains of those they had failed to save. None of them were told that their colonel had died in a maintenance chapel for the sin of remembering that citizens had faces. Domitian learned of his promotion in the scout arming bay. There was no ceremony beyond necessity. Carius stood before him, with his wounded shoulder sealed under fresh plate, his expression hidden behind his helm. Zosimus watched from a bench while a serf cleaned gore from his greaves. The bay's walls were lined with ash cloaks, suppressed rifles, demo charges, climbing rigs, and camouflage plates still stained with the colors of Vulscus. "You are advanced within the cadre," Carius said. Domitian did not answer immediately. He had expected reprimand, perhaps not formal, perhaps not even spoken, but something. He had questioned orders. He had argued over citizens. He had named the chapter worse than mortal soldiers. He had saved Carius and told himself it was discipline. "Why?" he asked. "Because you obeyed after understanding." "The cost." Domitian looked at him. "That is promotion? That is the beginning of worth." Zosimus remained silent. Carius stepped closer. "A weak warrior kills what he hates. A warbringer kills what must be removed." Domitian let the words settle into him. They did not soothe. They were not meant to. They were a weight placed into his hands and called a weapon. "What of doubt?" he asked. Carius studied him for a long moment. "Carry it. Do not let it carry you." The Deathmonger left orbit while Vulscus Secundus chanted thanks. The surviving populations gathered in the plazas that remained, in refinery yards, in trench chapels, in broken hab avenues beneath skies still raining ash. Priests with new oaths and watched tongues led them in prayers. The people knelt among the dead and praised the Emperor's angels. They thanked the olive-armored warriors who had broken the rebellion. They thanked the chapter that had saved the world. They thanked the unseen sons of dawn who had descended from the sky and cast down the false synod. They did not know who had ordered the artillery onto their districts. They did not know who had kept the choir alive until its agony became a beacon. They did not know who had ignited the mantle beneath the capital. They did not know that the worst slaughter of the war had been committed by the warriors they praised for ending it. Above them, the battle barge turned its prow toward the void. Its launch bays were closed again. Its hull faded into darkness, camouflage swallowing the last reflections of the burning world. Within its armories, weapons were cleaned. Within its apothecarian, gene seed slept in sacred cold. Within its archives, the official record hardened into acceptable truth. Below, beneath the foundations where the cathedral of the first compliance would be rebuilt, a black stone was laid in secret. No inscription marked it, no saint's name, no date, no record of the vault, no confession of the lie, no tally of the dead. Only the badge of the Emperor's Warbringers was carved into its surface, crossed swords pointing downward into the dark. The Emperor's Warbringers did not bring salvation, they brought compliance.